Welcome to this bedtime story. Take a deep breath and allow the words to carry you into the distant past. You're running through the twisted alleys of Port Royal with stolen boots that don't fit, and the taste of blood still thick on your tongue from where the bosun's mate cracked your jaw with his rope's end. The cobblestones are slick with something you don't want to identify, and behind you the shouts of the merchant ship's crew grow fainter as you duck between buildings that lean together like drunken conspirators. Your breath comes in sharp gasps that fog in the surprisingly cool Caribbean night, and you realize for the first time that even in these tropical waters, the darkness brings a chill that cuts through your thin sailor shirt like a blade. The last honest ship you'll ever serve just cast off from the harbor without you, and Captain Morrison's final words echo in your ears. Thieves don't deserve passage, boy. Find your own way to hell. The irony tastes bitter. You stole a moldy biscuit because 3 days without food had left you weak enough to fall from the rigging, and falling meant the cat-o'-nine tails. Now you're free to starve properly without the inconvenience of honest work. Your feet carry you toward the rougher end of the port, where the buildings sag under the weight of too much rain and too little maintenance. Here, the respectable merchants don't venture after sunset, and the smell of unwashed bodies mingles with rum, gunpowder, and something sweetly rotten that might be fruit or might be a flesh. The cold seems to follow you into these narrow spaces, settling between your shoulder blades like an unwelcome hand. A sign swings overhead on rusted chains, painted letters barely visible in the dim light spilling from shuttered windows. The Drowned Rat. The establishment beneath it looks like it might collapse if someone sneezed too hard, but warm light seeps through the cracks in the walls, and you can hear voices inside, rough voices, laughing voices, alive voices. You pause at the threshold, knowing that stepping through that door will change everything. That hungry men with nowhere else to go don't walk out of pirate taverns the same way they walked in. The door isn't locked. It's not even properly hinged, just a collection of planks held together with hope and metal strips that have seen better decades. You push it open and step into a world that hits you like a physical blow. Heat and smoke and the smell of bodies that have spent too long at sea without proper washing. But underneath the assault on your senses, there's something else. The warmth. Not just from the fire crackling in the stone hearth, but from the press of humanity. From men who've learned that body heat shared is body heat multiplied. The conversation doesn't stop when you enter, which is either very good or very bad. A dozen men sit around rough tables, some playing dice with pieces that look suspiciously like carved finger bones, others bent over tin cups that steam with something stronger than coffee. Most wear the mixed clothing of sailors, some pieces military, some merchant, some clearly taken from those who no longer needed them. But it's the way they wear these clothes that catches your attention. Layered, practical, each piece serving a purpose beyond simple coverage. You notice how they've gathered around the fire, not in a circle, but in a careful arrangement that maximizes shared warmth while keeping hands free for weapons. Even in this safe harbor, they think like hunted men, like men who've learned that comfort is temporary, but cold is constant. One man's coat appears to be made from at least 4 different garments sewn together with whatever thread could be found. Another wears what looks like sailcloth wrapped around his torso beneath a jacket that's more patches than original fabric. "New fish!" someone calls out, and heads turn towards you with the casual interest of predators evaluating potential prey. But there's no immediate hostility, just assessment. They're measuring you, your size, your scars, your desperation. In a place like this, desperation is currency, and yours is written clearly in the hollow of your cheeks and the tremor in your hands. "Come here, boy." The voice comes from a corner table where a man sits alone, his back to the wall and his face half hidden in shadow. What you can see of him suggests someone who's survived things that should have killed him, a patch where his left eye should be, scars that look like rope burns along his neck, hands that move with the careful precision of someone who's learned that wasted motion can be fatal. You look like you could use some warming. You approach his table because standing by the door makes you look more lost than you already are, and because the heat from the fire doesn't quite reach that far. As you get closer, you can see that his remaining eye is sharp and calculating, and that his clothes follow the same practical layering pattern as the others. But his are better made, better maintained, suggesting either more success or more experience in acquiring what he needs. "Merchant sailor?" he asked, gesturing to a chair across from him. The wood is worn smooth by countless hands and backsides, and when you sit, you can feel warmth rising from it, the accumulated heat of bodies that have occupied this space throughout the long evening. "Was," you admit. Captain Morrison didn't appreciate enterprise. Morrison. The man spits into the sawdust at his feet. Tight-fisted bastard who thinks feeding his crew is charity. I know the type. He raises his cup, tin, battered, with a handle that's been re-soldered more than once, and takes a sip of whatever's inside. The smell that reaches you is complex. Rum, certainly, but mixed with something else, something that makes your empty stomach clench with hunger and your cold bones ache with want. "Tom Cutlass," he says, setting down the cup, "and you look like death's been courting you regular." "Close enough," you reply, and he laughs. A sound like rope running through a block, rough but not unpleasant. "Well, Death'll have to wait his turn. Name's what matters first." When you give it, he nods like he's filing it away for future use. "Second thing that matters is whether you're fool enough to think honest work's going to save you, or smart enough to know it's what's been killing you slow all along." He signals to someone behind you, and a moment later, a cup appears at your elbow. The tin is warm to the touch, heated by whatever's inside, and when you lift it, the steam carries scents that make your mouth water despite the alcohol burn. The first sip scorches your throat, but the second brings warmth that spreads from your stomach outward, loosening muscles you didn't realize had been clenched against the cold. "Blip," Tom says, watching you drink. "Rum, beer, eggs if we can get them, heated with a poker from the fire, keeps a man's blood moving when the nights turn sharp." He leans back in his chair, studying you with that single eye. Question is, what are you willing to do to keep drinking it? The tavern around you continues its business. The dice rattle, voices rise and fall. Someone starts singing a song about a woman in Tortuga who may or may not have existed. But underneath it all, you're aware of the careful attention being paid to this conversation. These men have heard recruiting speeches before, have seen desperate sailors make choices that changed everything about their lives. Some are probably remembering their own first nights in places like this. Depends, you say, surprised by how steady your voice sounds. On whether the alternative is freezing honest in some alley. Smart answer. Tom reaches into his coat. You notice how the fabric is thick wool, sea-stained but well-maintained, with what looks like oiled leather sewn into the shoulders and elbows for extra protection against wind and spray. From an inner pocket, he produces a clay pipe and begins packing it with tobacco that smells of molasses and Caribbean spices. See, most men think the worst part of the pirate's life is the fighting, the hanging, the dying violent in foreign waters. But that's quick misery, and quick misery's got limits. He lights the pipe with a sliver of wood drawn from the fire, and smoke begins to curl between you, adding its warmth to the already thick air. Real misery's the cold, the wet, the way the wind cuts through you when you're trying to work the rigging in a storm, when your fingers won't bend proper, and you know that if you fall, the water's cold enough to stop your heart before you drown. The pipe smoke makes you think of better times, of warm ships and full bellies, but Tom's words paint a different picture. You've felt that cold merchant ships don't waste money on comfort any more than pirate ships do, but there's something in his voice that suggests he's talking about cold you haven't imagined yet. Merchant sailors, they get to go home, he continues, get to spend their money in warm taverns, sleep in beds that don't move. Pirates, we live on the water. We make the water our home, which means we make the cold our neighbor. Question is whether you're man enough to learn how to live with neighbors you can't trust. He takes another draw on the pipe, and you notice how he holds it, not just for pleasure, but as a source of warmth, letting the smoke heat his hands and face. Even this simple action carries the practical wisdom of someone who's learned to extract comfort from whatever's available. Captain Blackheart's taking on crew, Tom says almost casually. Good captain, fair with shares, doesn't kill his own men unless they deserve it. Ships called the Serpent's Tooth, and she's sailed everywhere from the Carolinas to the Windward Islands. But she's heading north soon, up where the water gets serious about being cold, and that means learning how to stay alive when staying warm becomes the difference between waking up and not. Around you, the warmth of the tavern seems suddenly fragile, a temporary shelter against forces much larger and more hostile than a Caribbean night. You think about the ship that left without you, about Captain Morrison's well-fed face, and the way he never seemed to feel the cold that left his crew shivering in the rigging. What's north? You ask. Ships, Tom says simply. Rich ships carrying rich cargo to rich men who think their money makes them safe. Spanish treasure fleets coming down from New Spain, loaded with silver and gold and comfortable passengers who've never spent a night without a fire. French merchantmen carrying furs and trade goods from Canada, and best of all, British naval vessels carrying payroll and supplies to the garrison towns. He leans forward, and in the firelight, his scarred face takes on an almost demonic cast. But northern waters don't forgive mistakes. You fall overboard in the Caribbean, you might swim to shore or get picked up. You fall overboard off Nova Scotia in December, you've got maybe 2 minutes before the cold stops your heart. That's why Blackheart needs men who understand that keeping warm isn't luxury. It's warfare. The rum in your cup has cooled, but you drain it anyway, feeling the last of its heat spread through your chest. The choice isn't really a choice at all. Between slow starvation in Port Royal's alleys and quick death in northern waters, at least the northern waters offer the possibility of survival, of learning something beyond mere endurance. When does he sail, you ask? Tom's grin reveals teeth that have seen better days, but his remaining eye gleams with something that might be approval. Dawn tide. But first, you need to understand something. He reaches across the table and grips your wrist with fingers that feel like they're made of rope and iron. Everything you think you know about staying alive at sea, forget it. Merchant ships try to keep you warm enough to work. Pirate ships expect you to keep yourself warm enough to fight. Learn the difference or feed the fish. He releases your wrist and stands, knocking his pipe against the table edge to scatter the ashes. Come on, then. Let's get you properly introduced to cold water sailing. Outside, the Caribbean night that seemed so chill when you first ran through it now feels almost tropical. Tom leads you through streets that grow progressively rougher, past buildings where light seeps through shutters and voices carry the sound of other conversations about other choices being made by other desperate men. The stars overhead are sharp and bright, and you notice how Tom walks, alert, aware, but not afraid, like a man who's learned to read danger in the shadows but doesn't let that reading stop him from moving forward. You reach the waterfront, where ships rock at anchor, their masts swaying against the star field like a forest of gallows. Most are dark, their crews either ashore drinking their pay or asleep in hammocks that swing with the tide. But one ship shows lights, not many, just enough to suggest life aboard, watchfulness, preparation for departure. The Serpent's Tooth, Tom says, pointing to a vessel that looks bigger and meaner than the honest merchantmen around her. Even in the darkness, you can see that she's been modified for purposes beyond simple cargo hauling. Her rails are higher, providing better protection for fighters on deck. Her gun ports are cut wide, suggesting heavier armament than a trader would carry. And something about her lines suggests speed, the ability to catch what she's chasing or outrun what's chasing her. But what catches your attention most is the activity around a fire built on the beach near her mooring. A dozen men sit around flames that seem larger and brighter than necessary for simple warmth, and as you get closer, you can see they're not just sitting, they're working. Hands busy with rope and canvas, voices carrying technical conversations about rigging and supplies. First lesson, Tom says, stopping just outside the circle of firelight. Pirates don't waste fuel. Every piece of wood, every drop of oil, every scrap that burns gets used efficient. But they also don't stint on what keeps them alive. See how they're sitting? You look more carefully and notice the arrangement. The men form a rough circle around the fire, but they're positioned so that their bodies create windbreaks for each other. Backs to the breeze, sides angled to share heat, close enough to benefit from each other's warmth, but far enough apart to move quickly if necessary. It's the geometry of survival disguised as casual gathering. Second lesson, Tom continues, look at what they're wearing. In the firelight, you can see that each man's clothing tells a story of practical adaptation. One wears what appears to be a naval officer's coat, but it's been modified with fur around the collar and extra pockets sewn into the lining. Another has wrapped his legs in strips of canvas that have been waterproofed with some kind of grease or tar. A third wears a hat that's clearly been assembled from multiple sources. The crown of one cap, the brim of another, lined with what looks like rabbit fur. Everything's been changed, you realize. Everything gets changed, Tom corrects. You take a piece of clothing, you think about what it does well and what it doesn't, and you fix what's wrong. Merchant sailors wear what they're given and curse the cold. Pirates wear what works and curse anyone stupid enough to stay cold. He steps into the firelight, and the conversation around the fire pauses just long enough for nods of recognition before continuing. You follow, feeling suddenly exposed in your thin sailor shirt and stolen boots, aware that your merchant ship clothing marks you as clearly as a sign hung around your neck. "Fresh meat," one of the men calls out, but his tone is more amused than hostile. "Tommy been telling tales about easy money and warm wenches again? Been telling truth about cold water and hard work," Tom replies, settling onto a piece of driftwood that's been positioned near the fire. "Boy here needs education before he kills himself with ignorance." The man who'd spoken, heavy-set with arms like tree trunks and a beard that's been woven with small bones, looks you up and down with professional interest. What's he know? "Merchant sailing," Tom says, which means he knows how to follow orders and tie knots and not much else useful. "Can he climb?" another voice asks. This one belongs to a thin man with quick eyes and hands that never stop moving, currently occupied with splicing two pieces of rope together. "Can he fight?" asks a third, younger than the others, but with scars across his knuckles that suggest he's answered that question about himself more than once. "Can he learn?" This from an older man, grizzled and weathered, who sits closest to the fire and seems to radiate authority despite saying little. His coat is different from the others, heavier, more carefully constructed, with brass buttons that might once have belonged to someone important. Captain Blackheart, you realize, though he doesn't introduce himself. "We'll see," Tom says, but he's got the sense to ask questions instead of making assumptions, which is more than some. The captain nods and returns his attention to the knife he's been sharpening, but you sense his continued awareness of your presence. These men are sizing you up with the casual efficiency of predators deciding whether you're worth hunting or worth recruiting. "First thing," the heavy-set man says, pulling a bundle from beside his seat, "is keeping your core warm. Body's like a fire. You let the center go cold, the edges die first." He unfolds what appears to be a vest made from multiple layers of different materials. Wool next to skin, canvas over that, oiled leather on the outside, pockets filled with whatever burns, tinder, char cloth, birch bark, if you can get it. He holds it out to you, and when you take it, you're surprised by both its weight and its flexibility. Each layer serves a purpose. The wool wicks moisture away from skin. The canvas provides insulation. The leather sheds water. But it's the pockets that intrigue you. Small compartments sewn throughout the garment, each designed to hold something specific. "Fire kit goes here," he says, indicating a pocket near your left ribs. "Striker, flint, tinder, char cloth. Keep it dry. Keep it close. Fire making's not just comfort, it's survival, and you need your tools where you can reach them even when your hands are too cold to feel what you're doing." Another pocket, this one over your heart. Emergency ration. Not much, just enough to keep you alive if you're in the water or separated from the ship. Hardtack, dried meat, something with fat in it. Fat burns hot, keeps your body warm from inside. A third pocket along your right side. Small tools, sail needle, thread, small knife. Clothing that can't be repaired is clothing that'll kill you eventually. Every man maintains his own gear because nobody else is going to do it for you. You put on the vest and immediately feel the difference. It's not just the added warmth, though that's significant. It's the sense of preparedness, of being equipped for whatever's coming. The weight is distributed evenly, and the multiple layers trap air in a way that multiplies their insulating effect. Second thing, the thin man with the busy hand says, setting down his rope work, is extremities, fingers, toes, ears, nose. Those go first, and once they're gone, they don't come back. He pulls off his own gloves, revealing hands that are whole but scarred, with 2 fingertips that end in smooth scar tissue rather than nails. Lost those to frostbite off Newfoundland, didn't know better then. He produces a pair of gloves that look like they've been crafted by someone who understands both protection and function. Leather outer, wool liner, oil treatment to shed water, but the real trick is keeping them dry inside. He shows you a small pouch of what appears to be sawdust. Cedar shavings absorb moisture, smell decent, and if you need emergency tinder, they'll take a spark. The gloves fit better than your stolen boots, and when you flex your fingers, you can feel how the design allows for both warmth and dexterity. These aren't the clumsy mittens that merchant sailors sometimes wear, but tools designed for men who need to handle weapons and rigging in conditions that would stop honest workers cold. Feet are harder, the younger man says, glancing meaningfully at your stolen boots. Good boots cost more than most men make in a year, and the kind that'll keep you alive in cold water cost more than some men are worth. His own boots are clearly expensive. Leather that's been oiled until it gleams. Construction that speaks of skilled craftsmanship. Soles thick enough to insulate against cold decks. But he continues producing a bundle of what looks like fabric scraps. There's ways to make bad boots better. Wool socks, yes, but wool socks kept dry. Layer them, change them when you can, and if you can't change them, at least wring them out and put them back on damp instead of soaking. He demonstrates the layering technique. Thin wool socks against the skin, thicker wool over that, then the boots with additional wool strips wrapped around the outside before being covered by oiled canvas strips that tie off below the knee. It looks complicated, but as he explains each step, the logic becomes clear. Waterproofing's the key, he says. Cold water'll kill you, but cold and wet together will kill you faster. Every piece of clothing, every inch of your body that might get wet, you think about how to keep it dry or how to get it dry again quick. Captain Blackheart looks up from his knife sharpening. Show him the cold pocket. The older man reaches into his coat and produces what appears to be a small metal container, perforated with tiny holes. Charcoal brazier, he explains. Fill it with burning coals from the ship's galley, close it tight, tuck it against your body under your clothes. Gives off heat for hours, doesn't flame up, doesn't go out in wind. He demonstrates how it opens and closes, how the air holes can be adjusted to control the burn rate, how the metal container itself becomes a heat source that can warm hands or feet or core body temperature. It's ingenious in its simplicity, and you can see how such a device could mean the difference between life and death during a long, cold watch. Course, the heavy-set man adds with a grin that shows missing teeth. All this gear don't mean nothing if you don't understand how to use your shipmates. Cold kills individuals. Groups stay warm. Hammock sharing, the thin man explains. Not what you think, just practical. 2 men in one hammock, backs together, sharing body heat. Takes some getting used to, but it works. Watch rotation, the younger man adds. Hot food, hot drinks, keep them moving through the crew. Man comes off a cold watch. He gets something warm inside him before he tries to sleep. Man going on watch, he gets warmed up before he faces the weather. And if someone starts showing signs of cold injury, Captain Blackheart says, his voice carrying quiet authority, everybody drops what they're doing to warm him up. Dead crew can't work the ship, and cold crew makes mistakes that kill other crew. The fire has burned lower during the conversation, but instead of building it higher, the men begin the process of banking it for the night. Coals are carefully separated and placed in smaller containers. Ashes are spread and stirred. Wood is arranged for quick lighting in the morning. Every action demonstrates the careful husbandry of resources that marks men who've learned not to waste anything that might keep them alive. Dawn tide, Captain Blackheart says, standing and brushing ash from his hands. We sail north with the morning wind, and we don't come back until we've taken enough Spanish silver to make the cold worthwhile. He looks directly at you. You want to come? You're welcome. You want to learn how to stay alive in water that'll freeze your blood. You'll get education. But understand this, I don't carry passengers. Every man works, every man fights, every man earns his share of whatever we take. The others begin gathering their gear, preparing to return to the ship for what sleep they can get before departure. You stand there in your new vest, wearing borrowed gloves, feeling the heat from the banked coals against your chest, and realize that you've already made your choice. The merchant marine taught you to endure cold and discomfort as unavoidable parts of life. These men are teaching you to fight back. I'll come, you say, and the words feel like signing a contract written in salt water and blood. Tom nods approval. Good. But remember what I told you? Forget everything you think you know about surviving at sea. Tonight, you sleep aboard a pirate ship. Tomorrow, you start learning why northern waters don't forgive and why the men who sail them have to be harder than the sea itself. You follow the group toward the ship's boat, listening to their quiet conversations about tides and weather and the best routes north for ships that don't want to be seen by naval patrols. The Caribbean night that seemed so cold when you first ran through Port Royal's alleys now feels almost warm, and you suspect that by the time you see these waters again, you'll remember this moment as the last time you were ever truly warm without having to fight for it. The boat cuts through water that reflects the stars like scattered coins, and ahead of you, the serpent's tooth waits with the patience of a predator. Her rigging stands black against the sky, and you can see light seeping from below decks where other members of the crew are making their own preparations for departure. Soon, you'll be among them, learning the rhythms of a ship that exists to hunt other ships, discovering whether you have what it takes to survive in waters where cold is just the first of many enemies trying to kill you. But for now, you sit in the boat and feel the warmth from your new vest spreading through your body and think about the strange alchemy that transforms desperate men into dangerous ones, that turns the simple human need for warmth into the foundation of a brotherhood built on shared survival against forces that want them all dead. The cold is coming, but you're no longer facing it alone, and that makes all the difference between the living and the drowned. The ship's motion hits you before you're fully awake, a rolling, pitching movement that sends your stomach lurching toward your throat in a way that the smaller boat never managed. You're lying in a hammock that swings with each wave, and the first thing you notice is that you're not alone. Another body shares the canvas sling, pressed back to back against you in an arrangement that felt awkward when you first climbed in, but now provides a core of warmth that your merchant sailor experience never included. The man sharing your sleeping space is called Willem, a Dutchman who's been sailing with Blackheart for 2 years, and his body heat has kept you from the bone-deep cold that would have made sleep impossible. The second thing you notice is the sound, not just the usual ship's chorus of creaking timbers and groaning rope, but voices calling orders in the darkness above, feet running across deck planks, the particular urgency that comes with dawn departure in unfriendly waters. Willem rolls away from you and drops to the deck with practiced silence, pulling on clothes that he kept warm by sleeping with them, and you follow his example, surprised to find that your new vest and the layers beneath it have stayed relatively dry despite the humidity of the lower deck. "First lesson you're learning already," Willem whispers, his English accented but clear. "Share heat. Share life. Merchant ships, they make you compete for comfort. Pirate ships, you cooperate or you die cold." He's pulling on the complex arrangement of socks and wrappings that protect his feet, moving with the efficiency of someone who's performed this ritual hundreds of times in conditions that don't allow for mistakes. Above your heads, you can hear Captain Blackheart's voice cutting through the pre-dawn darkness, not shouting, but carrying clearly, "Anchors up, lads. We're sailing north with the land breeze, and I want every man moving like his life depends on it, because it does." The words drift down through the deck planks, along with the sound of bare feet on wet wood and the particular rhythm of a crew that knows its business. You follow Willem up the ladder to the main deck, where the Caribbean dawn is just beginning to paint the eastern horizon with pale light. The air is cooler here, with a bite that cuts through your clothing despite the layers, and you can see your breath fogging in small puffs that dissipate quickly in the offshore breeze. Around you, the crew moves with quiet efficiency, handling lines and adjusting sails with minimal conversation and maximum coordination. But it's the way they're dressed that catches your attention now that you can see them clearly in the growing light. Every man wears multiple layers, but each has customized his outfit for specific tasks and specific vulnerabilities. The men working the upper rigging wear knitted caps that cover their ears and necks, with the option to pull down face coverings when the wind picks up. Those handling the heavier lines have reinforced gloves and extra padding around their shoulders where rope burns would otherwise be inevitable. See how they move? Tom appears beside you, his single eye bright with the satisfaction of a teacher whose student is beginning to understand. Not wasting motion, not fighting the cold, working with it, using it. He points to a crew member coiling a heavy line near the mainmast. Watch his breathing. See how he's not panting, not rushing? Cold air in your lungs too fast will steal your strength, make you weak when you need to be strong. Every breath measured, every movement efficient. The serpent's tooth is picking up speed now, her bow cutting through water that seems darker and somehow thicker than the shallow Caribbean waters you remember from merchant runs. The wind has a different quality, too, sharper, with an edge that speaks of distant cold places and storms that haven't reached these latitudes yet, but are somewhere out there, waiting. Where exactly are we heading? You ask, helping Willem secure a line that's been made fast near the rail. North by northeast, Willem replies, checking the tension on the rope with hands that move like they can read stress and strain by touch. Following, the trade winds up past the Bahamas, then picking up the Gulf Stream toward the Carolinas, but we're not stopping in the warm places. Nova Scotia, Tom adds, his voice carrying a mixture of anticipation and respect, where the French fish for cod and the Spanish run treasure ships loaded with silver from their New World mines. Rich waters, but cold enough to kill you 3 different ways before you have time to spend what you've stolen. Captain Blackheart calls for all hands, and the crew gathers in the waist of the ship where the morning light is strongest. You notice how they arrange themselves, not in neat ranks like a naval crew, but in a rough circle that allows everyone to see and be seen, with the men wearing the heaviest coats positioned to block the wind for those in thinner clothing. Even their formation demonstrates the constant awareness of cold and the need to share whatever warmth is available. Listen well, the captain begins, his voice carrying easily over the sound of wind and water. We're sailing into waters where the Spanish think they're safe because they think pirates can't survive the cold. They're wrong about pirates not surviving, but they're right about the cold being dangerous. He pulls out a chart, unrolling it against the deck, where the morning light reveals coastlines and shipping routes marked in different colored inks. Every man on this ship learns cold water discipline, or every man on this ship dies. No exceptions, no special treatment, no assuming someone else will save you if you make mistakes. The chart shows the eastern coast of North America, from the Caribbean islands up through what the English call Nova Scotia and the French call Acadia. Shipping routes are marked with dotted lines, showing the paths that treasure ships and merchant vessels follow when carrying their valuable cargoes south toward European markets. Spanish treasure fleets run this route, Blackheart continues, tracing a line with his finger, carrying silver from Potosi and Mexico City to Havana, then north to catch the trade winds home. But they make stops here and here and here to take on supplies and avoid the worst of the winter storms. Each stop he indicates is a potential hunting ground, but you can see from the chart's markings that these are also waters where the temperature drops significantly, where ships face weather that can kill as efficiently as any cannon. French fishing fleets work these banks, he goes on, indicating areas marked with symbols that suggest abundant cod grounds. They're not carrying gold, but they are carrying supplies, tools, preserved food, and most important of all, they're carrying knowledge of how to survive in these waters. The implication is clear. The crew will be raiding for more than treasure. They'll be stealing survival techniques, learning from men who've spent their lives working in conditions that would kill ordinary sailors. First rule of cold water piracy, Blackheart says, rolling up the chart. Every raid, every prize, every captured sailor is also a source of information about staying alive in conditions we're not used to. You steal their gold, but you also steal their methods, their clothing, their food preparation, They're techniques for keeping warm and dry. He assigns watch schedules, and you find yourself paired with a man called Black Pete, not because of his coloring, but because of his invariably grim mood and his tendency to assume the worst about any situation. Pete's pessimism, however, comes with a thorough knowledge of practical seamanship and an almost supernatural ability to predict weather changes. Feel that? Pete asks, holding up a weather-roughened hand to test the wind. Backing around to the east, picking up moisture. We'll have squalls by afternoon, and the temperature's going to drop 10 degrees when they hit. You can't feel any difference in the wind, but Pete's spent years reading subtle changes in air pressure and humidity, and his predictions have kept him alive through conditions that killed more optimistic sailors. Start thinking now about how you're going to stay dry, he advises. Wet clothes and cold wind aren't just uncomfortable, they're deadly. The morning passes in a routine of sail handling and deck maintenance, but with constant attention to the changing weather conditions. You notice how the crew never removes their protective clothing, even when the work makes them sweat. Instead, they adjust ventilation, opening coats and loosening wrappings to let air circulate, but keeping the layers in place for quick closure when the temperature drops. Merchant sailors strip down when they get hot. Willem explains during a brief break in the work. Pirate sailors learn to regulate temperature without removing protection. You take off your coat because you're sweating, then the wind shifts, and you're too cold to put it back on. That's how men die. The technique he demonstrates involves a complex system of ties and fastenings that allow clothing to be opened for cooling without being removed. Coats can be loosened at the chest and arms while staying secure at the shoulders. Gloves can be pulled back to expose fingertips for fine work while remaining attached by cords to prevent loss. By midday, the weather Pete predicted begins to materialize. Clouds build on the eastern horizon, dark and heavy with rain, and the wind picks up with a sharper edge that cuts through even the multiple layers of protective clothing. The crew responds with practiced efficiency, securing anything that might come loose and preparing for the kind of weather that turns sailing from an art into a survival exercise. Here it comes, Pete mutters, watching the squall line approach like a dark wall across the water. Time to see if your new clothes work as well as Tom promised. The first raindrops hit like cold bullets, and within minutes the squall enveloped the ship in a world of stinging rain and howling wind. The temperature drops so suddenly that you can feel it through all your layers, and you understand for the first time what Pete meant about the difference between merchant sailing and pirate survival. On a merchant ship, the crew would endure this weather with minimal protection, working through cold and wet, because the captain's profit didn't depend on crew comfort. Here, every man adjusts his clothing with the precision of a soldier preparing for battle. Oiled canvas covers come down over wool caps. Coat collars are raised and fastened tight. Glove wrists are secured to prevent water from running down sleeves. You follow Willem's example, pulling down the face covering attached to your knitted cap and adjusting the ties on your oiled leather outer layer. The result isn't complete protection from the cold and wet, but it's manageable protection, the difference between dangerous exposure and uncomfortable but survivable conditions. Feel the difference? Willem calls over the wind, his voice muffled by his own face covering. This is warm weather compared to what's coming. You learn to stay comfortable in this, you might live through what we'll face off Nova Scotia. The squall passes as quickly as it came, leaving the ship washed clean and the air significantly colder. You're damp but not soaked, cold but not numb. And you begin to understand why the pirates' elaborate clothing systems matter so much. It's not just about comfort. It's about maintaining the physical capability to fight, to work, to think clearly when survival depends on split-second decisions. That afternoon brings your first lesson in pirate food preparation, and it's immediately clear that everything about ship's cuisine has been adapted for cold weather survival. The cook, a massive Scotsman called Iron Mac, runs the galley with military precision and an absolute focus on nutrition that maximizes body heat production. Merchant ships feed you to keep you alive, Iron Mac explains, stirring a pot that smells of beef, onions, and spices you can't identify. Pirate ships feed you to keep you warm. Every meal planned for maximum heat generation, maximum energy, maximum fat content. The stew he's preparing contains more meat than you've seen in a month of merchant ship rations, but it's the other ingredients that make the difference. Root vegetables that store well and provide steady energy, dried beans that pack concentrated protein, and everywhere, fat, beef fat, pork fat, even seal fat that some of the crew acquired during previous northern voyages. Fat burns hot, Iron Mac continues, ladling the stew into wooden bowls that have been warmed by the galley fire. Your body needs fuel to make heat, and fat's the best fuel there is. Merchant captains skimp on fat because it's expensive. Pirates load up on fat because it keeps you alive. The meal also includes hardtack that's been soaked in hot broth to make it digestible, and a drink that Iron Mac calls pirate coffee. Actual coffee when it's available, mixed with whatever's on hand when it's not. Today's version includes coffee beans, chicory root, molasses, and a generous splash of rum, all heated together into something that tastes like liquid energy. Drink it hot, Iron Mac advises, handing you a tin cup that's warm enough to heat your hands through the metal. Drink it all, even if you don't like the taste. Hot liquid in your belly is like coal in a furnace. It heats you from inside out. The afternoon watch brings your first real test of the survival techniques you've been learning. The wind picks up again, not with rain this time, but with a dry cold that seems to leach heat directly from exposed skin. Working the rigging requires removing gloves for fine manipulation of ropes and knots, and you discover the challenge of maintaining dexterity while preventing frostbite. Rotate, Black Pete calls out, watching you struggle with a knot that should be simple but becomes complex when your fingers are too cold to feel what they're doing. 1 minute, bare hands, then warm them up, then 1 minute more. Push it too long and you lose fingers. The technique he demonstrates involves working in short bursts, warming hands against your body or in your armpits between tasks, never letting the cold build up to dangerous levels. It's slower than merchant ship methods, but it's sustainable in conditions that would disable an ordinary crew. You also learn the importance of foot care in cold conditions. Every few hours, Willem insists that you check your feet for signs of cold injury, remove your boots to massage circulation back into toes that are beginning to go numb, and change into dry socks if your current ones have become wet with sweat or seawater. Feet are your foundation, he explains, helping you rewrap your feet in the complex layering system. Lose your feet to frostbite, and you're useless for fighting, climbing, or even walking. In cold water, foot care isn't vanity. It's survival. As evening approaches and the temperature continues to drop, the crew begins preparations for the night watch that demonstrate how seriously they take cold weather survival. Hot meals are prepared for the men going on duty. Coal braziers are lit and distributed to key positions around the ship. Extra clothing is made ready for quick distribution if conditions worsen. But most importantly, the watch schedule itself is modified for cold weather. Instead of the long 4-hour watches common on merchant ships, Blackheart institutes 2-hour rotations that prevent any man from being exposed to dangerous cold for extended periods. Short watches, frequent relief, constant hot food and drink, the captain explains during the evening meal. It costs more in supplies, but it keeps the crew effective. Dead men don't handle sails, and half-frozen men make mistakes that get other men killed. Your first night watch in northern waters becomes a lesson in the constant vigilance required for cold weather survival. Even with all the protective clothing and careful preparation, the combination of wind, spray, and dropping temperature creates conditions that test every technique you've learned. You stand watch with Tom, who uses the quiet hours to continue your education in the practical philosophy of pirate survival. Merchant sailors endure, he says, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Pirates adapt. See the difference? He points out examples all around the ship. Crew members who rigged windbreaks from spare canvas to create pockets of calmer air. Men who've positioned small braziers to take advantage of wind patterns that carry heat where it's needed. Lookouts who've created insulated perches in the rigging that provide better visibility without excessive exposure to wind. Every piece of equipment, every arrangement of space, every routine gets modified for conditions. Tom continues, what works in the Caribbean gets you killed off Newfoundland. What keeps you alive off Newfoundland would be wasteful overkill in the Caribbean. Smart pirates learn the difference. The night passes slowly, marked by regular rotation of watch duties and constant attention to signs of cold injury among the crew. You learn to recognize the early symptoms, slurred speech that indicates a drop in core body temperature, loss of fine motor control in fingers and toes, the particular exhaustion that comes not from work, but from the body's effort to maintain heat in hostile conditions. But you also learn the remedies. Shared body heat, when someone starts showing signs of dangerous cooling, hot drinks and food to restore internal heat, the careful rewarming process that prevents additional injury to cold damaged tissue. Dawn brings clear skies and a wind that's definitely colder than anything you experienced in the Caribbean, but also brings the satisfaction of having survived your first night of real cold weather sailing. The crew goes through the morning routine of checking for cold injuries, examining clothing and equipment for damage, and preparing for another day of sailing toward waters where the cold will test every lesson you've learned and many you haven't yet imagined. Not bad for a merchant sailor, Willem says, helping you adjust the ties on your outer layers as the day watch takes over. You're learning to think like a pirate instead of just following orders like a servant. Captain Blackheart assembles the crew for the morning briefing, and his words carry a new urgency now that you're truly committed to northern waters. We're 3 days out from Caribbean warmth, he announces, and every day from here takes us further into conditions that don't forgive mistakes, but also every day takes us closer to ships loaded with treasure and crews that don't expect pirates to operate in waters this cold. He unfolds yesterday's chart again, but now the northern portions seem more relevant, more immediate. French fishing fleet reported here, he says, indicating a position off the Grand Banks. Spanish treasure ship overwintering in Halifax Harbor. British naval stores convoy running supplies up to the frontier garrisons. Each target represents not just potential wealth, but also the opportunity to acquire additional cold weather survival knowledge from crews that specialize in northern sailing. The raids will be educational as well as profitable, chances to learn techniques that could make the difference between successful piracy and death by exposure. Today we start serious cold weather training, Blackheart continues. Emergency procedures for man overboard in freezing water. Damage control when ice forms on the rigging. Combat techniques when your weapons and your body are both affected by cold. The morning's first lesson involves the terrifying reality of cold water immersion. Using a barrel of seawater that's been cooled with ice from the ship's stores, each crew member takes turns experiencing what happens when hands and arms are exposed to near-freezing water for different lengths of time. 30 seconds, you lose fine motor control, Ironmac explains, timing your immersion with a sand glass. 1 minute, you can't make a fist. 2 minutes, you can't grip a rope to save your life. 3 minutes in water this cold, and someone else has to pull you out because you can't pull yourself. The demonstration is brutal but educational. Even 30 seconds in the ice water leaves your hands cramped and nearly useless, requiring several minutes of careful rewarming before normal function returns. The lesson is clear. Falling overboard in northern waters means almost certain death unless rescue comes within minutes. This is why we don't work alone, Willem adds, helping you rewarm your hands with friction and shared body heat. Always a partner, always someone watching, always a plan for getting a man out of the water fast if he goes over. The crew practices rescue techniques adapted for cold water, throwing ropes with loops pre-tied for men whose hands won't work well enough to tie their own, using pulleys and mechanical advantage to haul up someone who's too cold to help with their own rescue, warming procedures that prevent dangerous shock when bringing near-frozen men back to normal body temperature. By midday, you're sailing in waters that are noticeably colder, with a gray quality to the light that speaks of northern latitudes and the approaching edge of winter. The crew has settled into routines that accommodate the constant need for warmth management, and you're beginning to understand why pirate ships that specialize in cold water raiding develop such strong internal cohesion. It's not just about sharing treasure, Tom explains during the afternoon meal. It's about sharing heat, sharing knowledge, sharing the work of staying alive in conditions that would kill individuals. Pirates who operate in warm waters can afford to be individual. Pirates who work cold waters become brothers, because brothers is all that survives. As the Serpent's Tooth continues north toward waters where the real testing will begin, you find yourself changing in ways that go beyond simply learning new techniques. The constant awareness of cold as an enemy has sharpened your attention to details, made you more observant of weather patterns and equipment condition, more cooperative with crew members whose knowledge might save your life. The merchant marine taught you to endure hardship as an inevitable part of life at sea. The pirates are teaching you to fight back against conditions that want to kill you, to take active measures that transform survival from passive endurance into active resistance against forces much larger than any individual man. Tonight, you'll stand another watch in conditions that continue to test every lesson you've learned. And tomorrow, you'll wake up further north, closer to waters where Spanish treasure ships shelter from winter storms, and French fishing fleets work grounds rich enough to justify the risk of operating in some of the most dangerous waters in the world. The cold is no longer just discomfort to be endured, but an opponent to be understood, respected, and ultimately defeated through knowledge, preparation, and the kind of cooperation that transforms individual sailors into something much more dangerous than the sum of their parts. The storm hits 3 days later with the sudden violence of northern waters asserting their authority over men who thought they understood the sea. You're working the rigging with Willem when the first gust nearly tears you from the ratlines, wind so cold it feels like being struck with ice hammers, carrying spray that turns to slush before it hits the deck. The temperature plummets 20 degrees in as many minutes, and suddenly, every lesson you've learned about cold weather survival becomes a matter of immediate life and death, rather than theoretical preparation. "Ice storm!" Willem shouts over wind that's gone from sharp to vicious, his words barely audible through the wool muffler he's pulled up over his mouth and nose. Real northern devil, everything's going to freeze, lines, blocks, deck, us if we're not careful. The crew responds with the disciplined efficiency of men who've faced this before, but there's an urgency in their movements that tells you this is serious weather, the kind that kills ships and crews that aren't properly prepared. Captain Blackheart's voice cuts through the howling wind with orders that prioritize survival over sailing. Reduce canvas. Secure everything that can move. Prepare for ice accumulation that will change the ship's handling characteristics and threaten the integrity of the rigging. You follow Willem down to the deck, your hands already numb, despite the multiple layers of gloves, feet slipping on planks that are developing a coating of ice with each wave that breaks over the bow. The familiar geography of the ship is transforming into something alien and treacherous, where every surface becomes a potential hazard and every movement requires conscious attention to balance and grip. Salt water shouldn't freeze, you call to Willem, confused by the ice forming despite the fact that you're still sailing in ocean water. Spray freezes before it hits, he explains, grabbing a line that's already stiffening with accumulated ice. Wind takes the salt out, leaves fresh water that turns solid in this cold. Give it another hour, and we'll be sailing an ice ship instead of a wooden one. The next few hours become a lesson in storm survival that makes your previous cold weather training seem like gentle preparation. Ice accumulates on every surface faster than the crew can chip it away, adding weight that threatens to make the ship top-heavy and unstable. Rigging lines become rigid cables that no longer run properly through blocks and pulleys, making sail adjustments difficult and dangerous. But it's the effect on the crew that proves most challenging. Despite all their protective clothing and careful preparation, the combination of wind, cold, and constant spray creates conditions that test the limits of human endurance. Men start showing signs of serious cold exposure, fumbling hands that can't manage simple knots, slurred speech that indicates dropping core body temperature, the kind of exhaustion that comes from bodies burning energy to maintain heat at an unsustainable rate. "Rotation every 15 minutes, Captain Blackheart orders, his own breath creating clouds of vapor that freeze almost immediately in the wind. No man stays exposed longer than that. Hot food and drink for everyone coming off deck. Coal braziers in the rigging shelters. You find yourself part of a carefully orchestrated system designed to keep the crew functional despite conditions that would disable ordinary sailors. Work parties rotate constantly between deck duty and warming below. Hot soup and rum-laced coffee move continuously from the galley to men who need immediate internal heat. Small coal braziers are positioned at key points around the ship, creating islands of warmth where men can restore feeling to hands and feet between tasks. Your first rotation below deck becomes a lesson in emergency warming techniques. Iron Mac has turned the galley into a medical station where men strip off ice-crusted outer clothing and submit to examination for signs of frostbite and hypothermia. You discover that your own hands have lost feeling in 3 fingertips, and your feet are dangerously cold despite all the protective layers. Circulation, Iron Mac says, massaging your hands with movements that are painful but necessary. Got to get the blood moving again before the tissue dies. He works your fingers with professional efficiency, then moves to your feet, checking for the waxy white color that indicates serious frostbite. The warming process involves a complex routine, gradual heat application that prevents the shock of rapid temperature change, massage to restore circulation, and careful monitoring for signs that the cold damage has gone too deep to reverse. You watch other crew members go through the same process, some with minor cold injuries that respond quickly to treatment, others with damage that will leave permanent marks. This is light weather compared to what's coming, Iron Mac says matter-of-factly, wrapping your hands in wool cloths that have been warmed by the galley fire. Wait until we get to the really cold water, where this kind of storm would kill half the crew if we weren't prepared for it. You're back on deck for your next rotation. You notice how the storm has changed the ship's character completely. The Serpent's Tooth has become a creature of ice and wind, her rigging strung with icicles that chime like deadly bells in the gale, her deck so slippery that movement requires handholds and careful planning. But the crew has adapted with her, modifying their techniques to work with conditions rather than against them. Lines that have become too stiff with ice to handle normally are warmed with small fires before use. Knots that can't be tied with numb fingers are pre-made and carried in warm pockets. Tasks that require fine motor control are performed in brief sessions, interrupted by hand-warming breaks that prevent dangerous loss of dexterity. "Watch the ice load," Black Pete calls out, pointing to the accumulation building on the yards and rigging. "Ship gets too heavy topside, and we'll roll over in the next big wave." The crew begins the dangerous work of ice removal, climbing frozen rigging to chip away accumulation that threatens the ship's stability. It's work that requires absolute focus and coordination, because a fall from icy rigging into an ice-covered deck means almost certain death. Men work in pairs, with safety lines and constant communication, each movement calculated to minimize risk while accomplishing necessary tasks. You find yourself paired with Tom for ice-clearing duty on the fore topsail yard, a position 40 feet above the deck that offers spectacular views of the storm and terrifying awareness of how small the ship appears in the surrounding chaos of wind and wave. The work involves using hatchets and hammers to break away ice accumulation, dangerous tools to handle with numb hands, while maintaining balance on a slippery, swaying platform. Don't rush, Tom instructs, demonstrating the technique of short, controlled strikes that remove ice without risking loss of balance or tools. Ice will kill you quick if you fall, but it'll kill you slow if you leave it alone. Take your time, do it right. The process becomes a meditation on precision under pressure. Each blow of the hatchet calculated to remove maximum ice with minimum risk. Between strikes, you warm your hands inside your coat, maintaining just enough dexterity to keep working safely. Below, other crew members clear ice from the deck and rigging, all part of a coordinated effort to keep the ship functional in conditions that push human capability to its limits. As the storm continues through the night, you begin to understand why pirates who specialize in northern waters develop such strong bonds of mutual dependence. In conditions like this, individual survival becomes impossible. Every man's life depends on every other man's competence, attention, and willingness to share the burden of staying alive. The watch rotation continues through the dark hours, with each man spending time on deck, time warming below, and time helping with the constant maintenance required to keep the ship operational. You learn to sleep in short bursts between duties, using shared body heat and warm clothing to restore energy for the next round of ice fighting and storm handling. Dawn brings a gradual lessening of the wind, but the cold remains intense, and the ship now carries tons of accumulated ice that must be systematically removed before normal sailing can resume. The crew works through the morning in teams, using fires, hot water, and mechanical force to chip away the ice coating that has transformed the Serpent's Tooth into a floating sculpture. Good storm, Captain Blackheart announces during the midday meal, his words surprising until you understand his meaning. Tested every man, tested all our gear, showed us what needs improvement before we face real northern weather. He's right. The storm has revealed weaknesses in equipment and technique that would have been fatal in more extreme conditions. Some clothing combinations proved inadequate for sustained exposure. Certain tool arrangements made tasks unnecessarily difficult with numb hands. The watch rotation schedule needs adjustment to prevent dangerous accumulation of fatigue, but it's also revealed the crew's capacity to work together under pressure, to share warmth and knowledge and effort in ways that multiply individual capability. You've participated in a kind of combat that has no enemy except the weather itself, and discovered that victory comes not from defeating the cold, but from outlasting it through superior preparation and cooperation. The afternoon brings clear skies and moderating temperatures, but also brings the first sighting of other ships since leaving Caribbean waters. Willem spots the sails first from his position in the crow's nest, and his call brings the crew to instant alertness. 3 sail to windward, running south with the wind. Captain Blackheart climbs the rigging with a spyglass, studying the distant vessels with the professional interest of a predator evaluating potential prey. When he descends, his expression carries the satisfaction of a hunter who's found promising quarry. French fishing fleet, he announces. 3 vessels, probably heading back to port after working the Grand Banks. They'll be loaded with preserved fish, but more importantly, they'll have supplies and equipment for cold weather fishing. The implication is clear. This will be the crew's first raid in northern waters, the first test of whether the survival techniques you've been learning will work under combat conditions. French fishing crews are experienced in cold water operations, but they're not military vessels, and they won't expect to encounter pirates this far north, this late in the season. Different kind of fighting up here, Tom explains as the crew prepares for pursuit. Cold affects everything. Your weapons, your reflexes, your ability to think clearly. But it affects them too, and they're not expecting us. The weapons come out of storage with modifications you haven't seen before. Muskets wrapped in oiled cloth to prevent ice formation on the mechanisms, cutlasses with extended grips that accommodate thick gloves, pistols carried in warm pockets close to the body to keep the powder dry and the metal functional. But it's the tactical preparations that prove most interesting. The crew dons extra layers specifically chosen for fighting rather than simple warmth. Protective padding that won't restrict movement, clothing colors that blend with ice and spray, face coverings that provide protection without limiting vision. They're transforming from sailors into something like Arctic warriors. French fishermen tough, Willem notes, checking the edge on his cutlass with professional care. They work in water cold enough to kill ordinary men, so they won't panic easy. But they're not fighters, and they won't expect pirates to be operating in conditions like this. The Serpent's Tooth begins closing the distance with the French vessels, and you can see through the ship's spyglass that they're indeed fishing boats, heavily loaded and riding low in the water. Their crews move with the efficient competence of men who work dangerous waters for a living, but they show no signs of alarm at the approaching ship. They think we're another fishing vessel, Captain Blackheart observes with satisfaction, or maybe a merchant ship running for shelter. They're not expecting pirates this far north. As the distance closes, you can make out details of the French ships that reveal the kind of cold weather adaptations the crew has been talking about. Their rigging includes extra stays and supports designed to handle ice loading. Their decks show modifications for working in spray that freezes on contact. Most telling, their crews wear clothing that represents generations of experience with northern waters. Study everything, Tom instructs, handing you a boarding axe modified with a longer handle for use with thick gloves. How they've rigged their ships, what they're wearing, how they work together. We're not just robbing them, we're learning from them. The attack comes with the sudden violence that characterizes pirate tactics, but modified for cold weather conditions. Instead of the wild shouting and dramatic flourishes common in warm water raids, the crew approaches with quiet efficiency, conserving energy and maintaining protective clothing until the last possible moment. The French fishermen resist briefly, but surrender quickly when they realize they're facing professional pirates rather than ordinary bandits. Their captain, a weathered man who's clearly spent decades working these waters, shows more concern for his crew's safety than for the cargo they're about to lose. "Parlez-vous anglais?" Captain Blackheart asks, and when the French captain nods, the negotiation begins with the kind of practical directness that characterizes northern waters. "We take what we need," Blackheart explains. "Food, tools, clothing, information about working in cold water. You cooperate, and your men stay warm and healthy. You resist, and people start dying from cold before they die from steel." The French captain understands the reality of the situation immediately. Fighting in these conditions would be deadly for both sides, and cooperation offers the best chance for his crew's survival. he orders his men to assist with transferring cargo and begins providing information about cold water fishing techniques that proves as valuable as any material goods. Ice fishing through holes cut in the deck, he explains, showing the modifications his ships have made for winter fishing. Special shelters that protect men working lines in freezing spray. Heating systems that keep the catch from freezing solid before it can be processed. You help transfer supplies that include items you hadn't imagined. Specially designed clothing that combines warmth with the flexibility needed for handling fishing gear. Preserved foods that maintain nutritional value in extreme cold. Tools and equipment that function reliably despite ice and freezing spray. But the most valuable transfers are knowledge and technique. The French crew demonstrates methods for keeping hands functional during extended work with nets and lines, shows clothing modifications that protect against specific hazards of cold water fishing, shares food preparation techniques that maximize warming potential while conserving fuel. Seal fat, one of the French fishermen explains, showing you a container of rendered fat that's been mixed with herbs and spices. Eat it straight or mix it with other food. Burns hot in your body, keeps you warm from inside for hours. The taste is strong and strange, but the warming effect is immediate and lasting. Your body temperature rises noticeably, and the energy boost helps combat the fatigue that's been accumulating from constant exposure to cold conditions. As the transfer of goods and knowledge continues, you notice how the encounter has become as much educational exchange as robbery. The French fishermen, once they understand they're not going to be murdered, begin sharing survival techniques with something approaching professional pride. They're men who've made their living in some of the most dangerous waters in the world, and they recognize the crew of the Serpent's Tooth as fellow practitioners of extreme seamanship. You sail further north, the French captain warns. You need to understand ice, not just spray ice, but real ice. Pack ice that can crush a ship, ice fields that can trap you until spring, ice so thick you walk on it, like land. He shows charts that mark ice conditions throughout the northern waters, information that could mean the difference between successful piracy and disappearing forever into the frozen waste of the far Atlantic. The charts reveal shipping routes that stay open even in winter, protected harbors where ships shelter from the worst storms, and most importantly, the locations where Spanish treasure ships and British naval vessels concentrate during the cold months. Here, he points to a notation on the chart. Spanish silver ship winters every year. Protected harbor. Good supplies. But they think ice keeps them safe from pirates. Maybe they're right. Maybe not. The implication is clear. The really valuable targets are the ships that shelter in northern ports during winter, loaded with cargo they can't risk losing to storms. Protected by cold, they think no pirate can survive. Those are the prizes that justify the risks of cold water piracy, the scores that make all the suffering and danger worthwhile. As the raid concludes and the French ships prepare to continue their journey south, the French captain offers a final piece of advice that carries the weight of decades in dangerous waters. Cold is like the sea, he says, shaking hands with Captain Blackheart in a gesture that acknowledges professional respect between men who understand extreme conditions. Fight it, and it kills you. Work with it, understand it, make it your ally, and it makes you stronger than men who only know warm water. The Serpent's Tooth sets course northward again, now laden with supplies and knowledge that transform your understanding of what's possible in cold water operations. The crew spends the evening examining their new acquisitions, modifying existing gear based on French techniques, planning how to integrate new methods into their own survival systems. First, but the charts acquired from the French show that you're still in relatively warm northern waters compared to what lies ahead. The real ice, the killing cold, the waters where treasure ships shelter because they think no pirate can reach them, those waters wait further north, beyond the edge of the maps most sailors ever see. Tonight, you'll sleep in a hammock shared with Willem, warmed by body heat and heated stones from the galley, wrapped in French fishing gear that represents generations of experience with conditions you're only beginning to understand. Tomorrow, you'll wake up closer to waters where Spanish silver waits under the protection of cold that has never been defeated by pirates before. The storm tested your ability to survive northern weather, but the raid proved your ability to fight and learn in those same conditions. Now comes the real challenge, finding out whether pirates can operate in waters so cold that even the most experienced northern sailors avoid them during the worst months of winter. The ice begins appearing 2 weeks later. Not the spray ice you've learned to manage, but real ice. Massive chunks that drift past the ship like floating mountains, remnants of glaciers that have broken off from lands so far north that no European has ever seen them. The water between the ice floes is black and thick, moving with the sluggish rhythm of liquid that's close to freezing solid, and when you lean over the rail to study the strange new seascape, your breath creates clouds so dense they obscure your vision. Pack ice, Willem explains, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and apprehension as he points to the larger formations. Means we're getting close to where the really big ice lives, the kind that can trap a ship until spring or crush her hull like an egg if the wind's wrong. Captain Blackheart has been consulting the French charts constantly, comparing their notations about ice conditions with the evidence of his own eyes, making decisions that will determine whether the crew finds the Spanish treasure ship they're seeking or disappears forever into frozen waters that no rescue vessel could ever reach. The charts show a protected harbor another 3 days north, marked with symbols that indicate regular use by ships seeking winter shelter. Perfect hunting ground, the captain explains during the morning briefing, his breath forming ice crystals that sparkle in the low Arctic sunlight. Ships that winter over in protected harbors think the ice makes them safe. They reduce their watches, let their crews get soft and comfortable, don't expect anyone to reach them through the ice fields. But reaching those protected harbors requires navigating through ice conditions that test every survival skill you've learned and demand new techniques you haven't imagined. The ship must be maneuvered through channels that open and close with wind and tide, avoiding ice formations that could hold the hull or trap the vessel in a grip that wouldn't release until the spring thaw. Ice navigation, Tom explains, teaching you to read the patterns in the frozen seascape, is like reading the weather, but deadlier. Wrong guess about wind direction, and you get wet. Wrong guess about ice movement, and you get crushed. The techniques he demonstrates involve constant observation of ice color, movement, and formation patterns. White ice is usually solid and dangerous. Blue-green ice might be rotten and breakable. Ice that moves in formation indicates current patterns that can be used for navigation. Ice that moves erratically signals wind patterns that could trap an unwary ship. The crew's clothing has been modified again for these extreme conditions, incorporating techniques learned from the French fishermen but adapted for even colder environments. You now wear what amounts to a personal heating system, multiple layers that create trapped air spaces, with sealed pockets containing heated stones, charcoal hand warmers, and even small containers of the seal fat that burn slowly in your body to provide internal heat. But the most important modifications are psychological and tactical. The crew has developed new methods for staying alert and functional in conditions that numb both body and mind. Watch schedules are shortened to 30-minute rotations. Hot drinks move continuously from the galley to crew members on duty. Most importantly, everything is done in pairs or groups because individual judgment becomes unreliable when cold reaches levels that affect brain function. Cold makes you stupid, Black Pete warns during a particularly difficult passage between two massive ice floes. Makes you think you're fine when you're dying, makes you make decisions that get other people killed. That's why we never trust one man's judgment in conditions like this. The system they've developed requires constant cross-checking and verification. Navigation decisions are made by committee. Watch duties are supervised by rotating partners. Even simple tasks like handling lines or adjusting rigging are performed with witnesses who can detect signs of cold-induced confusion before they become dangerous. You experience this yourself when you're assigned to help navigate a particularly treacherous ice passage. Despite all your protective clothing and careful attention to warmth, the combination of wind, spray, and extreme cold begins affecting your ability to think clearly. Simple calculations become difficult. You find yourself making obvious mistakes in rope handling that would be automatic in warmer conditions. "You're getting cold stupid," Willem observes, noticing your fumbling attempts to secure a line that should be a routine operation. "Time to warm up before you do something that kills us all." The warming process he initiates involves more than just restoring body heat. You're taken below to the galley where Iron Mac forces you to drink hot soup while he evaluates your mental clarity with simple questions and tasks. The goal is to detect and reverse cold-induced cognitive impairment before it progresses to the point of dangerous decision-making. "Count backward from 100 by sevens," Iron Mac instructs, watching your face for signs of confusion or delayed response. When you struggle with the arithmetic that should be simple, he increases the warming protocols. Heated stones placed against your core, hot food to raise your internal temperature, and most importantly, warm human contact that helps restore normal blood circulation to your brain. This is why pirates who work the ice become closer than brothers, Iron Mac explains while massaging warmth back into your hands and feet. In these conditions, every man's life depends on every other man's ability to think clearly and act quickly. Can't afford pride, can't afford independence, can't afford anything except taking care of each other. As your mental clarity returns with your body heat, you understand why the crew has developed such elaborate systems for mutual support and verification. The cold in these waters doesn't just threaten physical survival. It threatens the cognitive ability necessary for survival decisions. The difference between life and death becomes the difference between crews that support each other's mental function and crews that allow individuals to make cold-induced mistakes. the serpent's tooth continues north through increasingly challenging ice conditions, following channels that sometimes extend for miles and sometimes close without warning, forcing rapid backtracking and alternative route finding. The ship's handling characteristics change constantly as ice forms on the rigging and hull, requiring constant adjustments to sail configuration and ballast distribution. But the most challenging aspect proves to be the effect of extreme cold on the ship's basic systems. Lines become so stiff with ice that they won't run through blocks without being warmed. Metal fixtures become brittle enough to shatter under normal stress. Even the wood of the hull contracts and expands with temperature changes, opening seams that must be constantly monitored and repaired. Ships fighting the cold same as we are, the ship's carpenter explains, showing you cracks that have opened in planking exposed to repeated freeze-thaw cycles. Wood wasn't meant for this kind of temperature change. Neither were the iron fittings, the rope, or anything else about a normal ship. The repairs he demonstrates involve techniques adapted specifically for extreme cold conditions, caulking compounds that remain flexible despite freezing temperatures, metal reinforcements that accommodate thermal expansion and contraction, rope treatments that prevent ice formation in critical rigging. This is why most ships don't operate in these waters, he continues, applying a mixture of tar and whale oil to a seam that's opened near the waterline. Too hard on the ship, too hard on the crew. Too many things can go wrong. But that's also why the prizes up here are so rich. Nobody else is willing to take the risks. On the 5th day of ice navigation, you sight the protected harbor marked on the French charts, a deep inlet sheltered by high cliffs and partially enclosed by a natural breakwater of solid ice. But more importantly, you sight the masts of ships anchored in the harbor's protection, vessels that have chosen to winter over rather than risk the storms and ice of the open ocean. Spanish colors, Captain Blackheart announces with satisfaction, studying the distant ships through his spyglass. 2 vessels, probably treasure ships that took shelter here to wait out the winter storms. Exactly what we came north to find. But the harbor's protection cuts both ways. The same ice and geography that shelter the Spanish ships from winter storms also provide natural defenses against attack. Any approach must be made through ice-choked waters that could trap the serpent's tooth as easily as they've trapped the prey. The raid will require new tactics adapted for conditions unlike anything pirates have attempted before. Ice warfare, Tom explains, studying the harbor's approaches with the calculating eye of a man planning unprecedented assault. We can't rely on wind and maneuver like normal ship fighting. Got to think like land soldiers using the ice as terrain. The plan that develops over the next 2 days demonstrates the crew's evolution from warm water pirates into something entirely new. Cold weather raiders capable of operating in conditions that would disable conventional naval forces. Instead of a direct ship-to-ship attack, they'll use the ice itself as both weapon and cover. Small boats through the ice channels, Captain Blackheart outlines, pointing to narrow waterways between the frozen formations. Teams of 6 men each, equipped for ice travel, armed for close fighting. We approach from 3 directions, coordinate the attacks, take the ships before they can organize resistance. The equipment preparation reveals how completely the crew has adapted to extreme conditions. Each raiding party will carry specialized gear: ice axes for cutting through frozen barriers, snowshoes for movement across solid ice, heating equipment for maintaining function during extended exposure to killing cold. Most importantly, each team includes men trained in cold weather medical treatment because injuries in these conditions can be fatal within minutes if not properly managed. You're assigned to Willem's team, a group that includes 2 men from the original crew and 3 others, whose cold weather expertise has made them leaders in the new discipline of ice warfare. The weapons you carry have been modified for the specific challenges of fighting in extreme cold. Shorter swords that can be drawn quickly despite thick gloves. Pistols carried in heated pouches to prevent the mechanisms from freezing. Axes and knives with extended handles that accommodate winter gear. But the most important preparation is psychological. Accepting that this raid will be unlike any fight you've ever imagined, where environmental conditions pose as much threat as enemy weapons, where victory depends as much on cold weather survival as on combat skills. Remember, Willem instructs as the teams prepare to launch their small boats into the ice-choked waters, we're not just fighting Spanish sailors, we're fighting the cold, the ice, the distance from our ship, and time itself. Everything has to happen fast, because nobody can survive exposed in these conditions for very long. The approach through the ice fields becomes a masterpiece of navigation and timing. The small boats move through channels barely wide enough for their passage, using poles and oars to push aside ice chunks that could hold their hulls, following routes that change constantly as the ice shifts with wind and current. You learn to read ice movement the way you once read wind patterns, understanding that survival depends on working with the frozen environment rather than fighting it. The Spanish ships, when you finally reach them, proved to be exactly what Captain Blackheart predicted. Treasure vessels that have reduced their watches and relaxed their vigilance, crews that have grown comfortable in their protected harbor, officers who never imagined that pirates could reach them through the ice that surrounds their sanctuary. The attack unfolds with the coordinated precision of a land assault, rather than the chaotic boarding actions typical of warm water piracy. Teams approach from different directions, using ice formations as cover, timing their final assault to achieve complete surprise before the Spanish crews can organize effective resistance. Your team's approach brings you across a section of solid ice that extends like a bridge between floating formations, a surface firm enough to support men but too thin to trust for extended time. Willem leads with ice axes, testing each step, the rest of the team following in single file with ropes connecting each man to his neighbors. Like mountain climbing, Willem explains, demonstrating the technique of ice axe placement that provides security on the treacherous surface. Except the mountain moves, and if you fall through, you die in minutes instead of seconds. The final assault on the Spanish treasure ship happened so quickly that resistance barely has time to organize. Your team reaches the ship's side just as the other raiding parties engage from their own directions, creating confusion that prevents coordinated defense. But it's the environment itself that proves the pirates' greatest ally. Spanish sailors equipped for routine harbor duty simply can't function effectively in conditions that require specialized cold weather gear and training. Surrender or freeze, Willem calls out to the Spanish captain, a practical offer that acknowledges the reality of the situation. Fighting in these conditions would be deadly for both sides, and the Spanish crew, despite their numerical advantage, lacks the equipment and training necessary for combat in extreme cold. The treasure that's revealed when the Spanish ships are secured exceeds even Captain Blackheart's optimistic expectations. Silver ingots from the mines of Potosi, marked with Spanish royal seals. Chests of coins that represent years of colonial taxation. Most valuable of all, charts and documents that reveal the winter locations of other treasure ships, the routes they follow, the harbors where they shelter during the months when normal piracy becomes impossible. But the raid also reveals something more important than treasure. Proof that pirates can operate successfully in conditions previously thought impossible. That the ice and cold that protect traditional shipping can be turned into weapons for those willing to learn the necessary skills. New kind of piracy, Captain Blackheart observes with satisfaction as the crews transfer treasure and supplies from the captured ships to the waiting boats. Ice piracy, cold water raiding, hunting in waters where prey thinks it's safe because the environment's too hostile for predators. The return journey to the Serpent's Tooth through the ice fields demonstrates how completely you've been transformed by the northern waters. Loaded boats that would be nearly impossible to maneuver in normal conditions become manageable through techniques learned from necessity. Ice that would have been an impassable barrier becomes a highway for men who've learned to read its patterns and use its characteristics. The crew's celebration that night reflects their understanding that they've achieved something unprecedented in the history of piracy. Not just a successful raid, but the development of entirely new methods for operating in environments that had previously been considered impossible for their profession. Spanish treasure ships won't feel safe in any harbor now, Tom observes, examining silver coins by the light of a carefully maintained fire. Ice won't protect them anymore because now there are pirates who use ice instead of being stopped by it. Iron Mac produces a feast that combines captured Spanish supplies with the crew's own provisions, creating a meal that celebrates both material success and technical achievement. But the conversation around the fire focuses more on the methods they've developed than on the wealth they've acquired. We've learned something nobody's ever learned before, Willem says, his words carrying the satisfaction of a man who's participated in genuine innovation. How to make the cold work for us instead of against us. How to turn the worst sailing conditions in the world into hunting grounds that nobody else can reach. As the Serpent's Tooth begins the journey back toward warmer waters, loaded with Spanish treasure and carrying knowledge that could revolutionize cold-weather maritime operations, you realize that you've become part of something much larger than ordinary piracy. The crew has evolved into Arctic specialists, men capable of operating in conditions that would kill conventional sailors, hunters who use the environment itself as their primary weapon. The techniques you've learned go far beyond simple survival. They represent a complete transformation of what's possible in maritime warfare. Future raids will be planned not around favorable weather, but around the strategic advantages provided by conditions that enemy crews can't handle. Ice-locked harbors will become preferred targets rather than obstacles. The worst storms of winter will become opportunities for approach and attack rather than periods of inactivity. But more than tactical innovation, the experience has created a brotherhood based on shared survival in conditions that test the absolute limits of human endurance and cooperation. Every man's life has depended completely on every other man's competence and commitment, creating bonds that go deeper than simple crew loyalty. As you settle into your shared hammock for another night, warmed by Willem's bada heat and heated stones from the galley, you think about the merchant sailor who fled Port Royal months ago, desperate and alone, with no understanding of what survival really meant. That person seems like someone you once knew, rather than someone you once were. Tomorrow, you'll wake up sailing south toward waters that will seem tropical compared to what you've experienced, carrying treasure that proves the value of pushing beyond conventional limits, and knowledge that will change the nature of piracy forever. The cold that once threatened to kill you has become your teacher, your ally, and ultimately your weapon in a war where environmental conditions matter more than cannon or cutlass. But the journey south brings unexpected challenges as the crew discovers that adaptation to extreme cold has changed them in ways that go beyond simple survival skills. Your body, along with those of your shipmates, has become so thoroughly acclimated to Arctic conditions that the gradual warming feels almost like illness, a strange fever that makes moderate temperatures seem uncomfortably hot, that creates a restless energy where focused calm had become natural. Ice withdrawal, Iron Mac explains during the morning meal, observing how the crew fidgets and sweats despite air that would have seemed bitingly cold when you first sailed north. Bodies get used to fighting the cold, burning energy to stay warm. Take away the cold, and all that energy's got nowhere to go. The phenomenon affects more than just physical comfort. The intense cooperation and mutual dependence that had become automatic in Arctic conditions begins to relax as the immediate threat of death from exposure diminishes. Men who had shared body heat and constant vigilance for each other's survival start reclaiming individual space and privacy, and the result feels like the dissolution of something precious and hard-won. Crew's getting soft, Tom observes with concern, watching men work with less than the precision that had been essential for survival in the ice. Warm weather makes them think they can afford to be careless again. Captain Blackheart recognizes the problem and addresses it with the same systematic approach he's applied to cold weather operations. Instead of allowing the crew to simply readjust to warm weather sailing, he maintains many of the Arctic protocols. The shortened watch rotations, the constant attention to gear maintenance, the shared meal preparation that had created such strong bonds during the northern voyage. "We're not warm water pirates anymore," he announces during an evening briefing, the Spanish treasure stacked around him as evidence of what the new methods can accomplish. "We're specialists, cold water raiders, men who hunt where other pirates can't go and take prizes other pirates can't reach." The plan he outlines involves using their hard-won Arctic expertise strategically, timing future operations to take advantage of winter conditions that disable conventional piracy while creating opportunities for crews trained in extreme weather operations. Instead of following the traditional pattern of avoiding the worst sailing seasons, they'll seek them out, becoming active when other pirates are forced into port by conditions they can't handle. "Winter raiding season," Willem says with enthusiasm, studying charts that show shipping routes during the months when most pirates cease operations. Spanish treasure convoys, French supply ships, British naval vessels, all running on schedule because they think weather keeps them safe from pirates. The captured Spanish charts prove especially valuable in this planning, revealing not just winter shipping routes, but the locations of harbors and supply stations that serve ships during the months when normal piracy becomes impossible. These become targets for raids that will use cold weather as camouflage and protection rather than obstacle. But the transition south also brings encounters with other pirates who view the crew of the Serpent's Tooth with mixture of admiration, skepticism, and professional jealousy. Word of their Arctic success has spread through the networks of taverns and safe harbors that connect pirate operations, creating a reputation that opens some doors while closing others. Ice pirates, you hear whispered in a tavern in Newfoundland, where the crew stops for supplies and information. The term carries respect, but also the kind of wariness reserved for men who've developed capabilities that set them apart from ordinary practitioners of their profession. Some pirate crews want to learn the techniques that enabled Arctic operations. Others regard cold weather specialization as a necessary complication of what should be simple robbery and violence. The division creates tension that reflects larger questions about the future direction of piracy in increasingly well-defended waters. Traditional pirates think we're showing off, Black Pete observes during a conversation with crews from other ships. They don't understand that conditions are changing, that the easy targets are getting scarce, that the only way to stay profitable is to go where others can't follow. The skepticism proves costly for crews that dismiss the value of cold weather preparation. During your stay in Newfoundland, 2 other pirate ships attempt to follow your route north, seeking their own Spanish treasure ships in Arctic harbors. Neither returns, and the wreckage that washes ashore months later suggests they were defeated not by enemy action, but by conditions they weren't prepared to handle. Could have saved them, Willem says grimly, examining pieces of rigging that show the characteristic damage of ice accumulation and temperature stress. But they wouldn't listen, thought courage and traditional seamanship were enough for conditions that require specific knowledge and equipment. The failures of other crews to replicate your success reinforces the value of the specialized techniques you've developed, but also creates isolation from the broader pirate community. The crew of the Serpent's Tooth has become something unique, specialists in a discipline that few understand and fewer can master. This isolation becomes more pronounced when you encounter former associates from your merchant sailing days. The physical changes wrought by Arctic adaptation are visible. Weathered skin, scarred hands, the particular alertness that comes from months of constant vigilance against life-threatening conditions. But the psychological changes go deeper, creating a gap between men who've survived extreme conditions and those who've never faced them. "You're different," observes a sailor you knew from Captain Morrison's ship, studying your face during a chance meeting in a Halifax tavern. "Harder, like you've seen things that change a man." The observation is accurate but incomplete. The Arctic voyage has indeed changed you, but not in the way most people understand. The hardness he perceives isn't cruelty or indifference, but the particular clarity that comes from understanding exactly what survival requires and what cooperation means when individual failure kills everyone. Different priorities, you explain, unable to adequately convey the transformation that comes from shared survival in conditions that test the absolute limits of human endurance. Different understanding of what matters and what doesn't. The conversation reveals how completely your perspective has shifted from individual concerns to group survival, from short-term comfort to long-term capability, from following orders to taking responsibility for decisions that affect everyone around you. The merchant sailor's mentality of enduring hardship as an inevitable part of life has been replaced by the pirate specialist's approach of mastering conditions that others consider impossible. As winter approaches, Captain Blackheart begins planning the crew's return to Arctic waters, but with objectives that go beyond simple treasure hunting. The success of the previous voyage has proven that cold weather piracy is possible. Now the goal is to establish it as a systematic discipline that can be taught, refined, and expanded. School for ice pirates, he explains, outlining plans for a permanent winter base in the protected waters off Nova Scotia. Take the best men from other crews, teach them what we've learned, build a fleet that can operate year-round in waters where treasure ships think they're safe. The concept represents a revolutionary approach to piracy, not random raiding by individual crews, but organized operations that use environmental expertise as their primary tactical advantage. Instead of competing with naval forces on traditional terms, the ice pirates would create an entirely new category of maritime warfare. The base he envisions would include facilities for cold weather training, workshops for modifying equipment and clothing, storage for the specialized supplies necessary for Arctic operations, and most importantly, a community of men who understand that survival in extreme conditions requires cooperation rather than competition. But first, he continues, we prove the concept. One more winter voyage, this time with specific objectives. Map the ice routes, identify the best hunting grounds, establish supply caches, and most importantly, train men who can train others. The preparations for this second Arctic voyage reveal how much the crew's capabilities have advanced since their first tentative venture into cold waters. Equipment that was experimental has been refined through hard experience. Techniques that were theoretical have been proven under combat conditions. Most importantly, the crew has developed the confidence that comes from knowing they've mastered conditions that defeat other men. Your own role in these preparations has evolved far beyond simple crew member. The survival techniques you've learned and the expertise you've developed make you a teacher for newer crew members who haven't experienced Arctic conditions. The knowledge you share could mean the difference between life and death for men who'll face the ice for the first time. Hand positioning for ice axe work. You explain to a group of recruits demonstrating the techniques Willem taught you during your first ice passage. Grip too tight and your hands cramp in the cold. Too loose and you lose the axe when you need it most. Like everything else in the ice, it's about finding the balance between control and adaptation. The teaching process reveals how much you've internalized not just specific techniques, but the underlying philosophy of Arctic survival. Every lesson emphasizes cooperation over individual effort, preparation over improvisation, understanding environmental conditions over fighting them. The recruits learn not just how to stay warm, but how to think like men whose lives depend on environmental mastery. But the most important lesson proves to be psychological rather than technical. The understanding that extreme conditions create opportunities for men willing to accept their challenges. The ice that had seemed like an enemy during your first exposure has become an ally that provides tactical advantages unavailable to conventional pirates. Cold is a weapon, you tell the recruits, repeating wisdom that Tom shared during your own early training. Most men try to avoid it, endure it, or escape from it. We learn to use it for concealment, for surprise, for creating conditions that favor us over our enemies. As the Serpent's Tooth prepares for departure on her second Arctic voyage, the crew's reputation attracts attention from unexpected sources. Naval authorities, who had dismissed pirates as a minor nuisance, begin taking notice of raiders who can operate in waters where conventional pursuit becomes impossible. Spanish colonial officials express concern about treasure routes they had considered secure from pirate attack. Getting famous, Tom notes, with a mixture of pride and concern, observing the increased security around ships that had previously relied solely on weather for protection. Fame's good for recruiting and bad for surprise. Have to be careful not to let success make the work harder. The balance between reputation and effectiveness becomes a constant consideration as the crew plans operations that will push Arctic piracy from experimental technique to established practice. Success has created expectations that must be met while maintaining the innovative approach that made success possible in the first place. The second departure for Arctic waters feels different from the first. Not the desperate flight from conventional piracy that had driven your initial voyage north, but the confident advance of specialists moving into their preferred operating environment. The crew knows what to expect from the ice and cold, understands the techniques necessary for survival and success, and most importantly, trusts each other with the absolute confidence that comes from shared survival in conditions that test everything human beings are capable of enduring. As the Serpent's Tooth sails north toward waters that will again test every technique you've learned and demand new innovations you haven't yet imagined, you think about the merchant sailor who had stumbled into Tom's tavern in Port Royal, desperate and alone, with no understanding of what survival really meant or what cooperation could accomplish. That person's transformation into someone capable of teaching Arctic survival techniques to other men represents more than personal growth. It demonstrates the human capacity to adapt to conditions that initially seem impossible, to find opportunity in circumstances that others regard as purely threatening, and to build new forms of cooperation that make survival possible where individual effort fails. The cold is waiting ahead, but it's no longer an enemy to be endured or escaped. It's become an environment you understand, a tactical advantage you can exploit, and ultimately a teacher that has transformed not just your survival capabilities, but your understanding of what humans can accomplish when they choose cooperation over competition, mastery over submission, and innovation over acceptance of traditional limitations. Tonight, you'll sleep in a hammock shared with Willem, warmed by techniques that have been refined through hard experience, surrounded by men who trust you with their lives because you've proven you can be trusted with survival decisions that affect everyone aboard. Tomorrow, you'll wake up sailing toward conditions that would have killed the merchant sailor you once were, but that now represents simply another day's work for the ice pirate you've become. The second journey north unfolds with the confidence of specialists returning to familiar territory, but also reveals how much the crew has evolved beyond simple survival towards something approaching mastery of Arctic conditions. The ice that had seemed like alien landscape during your first voyage now appears as readable terrain, a complex geography of opportunity and danger that you've learned to interpret with the fluency of a native speaker. Look there. You find yourself instructing one of the new recruits, pointing to a formation of ice flows that shows characteristic patterns of stress and movement. See how the blue ice is cracked along those lines? That tells you the current's running underneath, probably strong enough to open a channel if the wind shifts northeast. Freshwater ice from the glaciers, solid but brittle when it's under pressure. The recruit listens with the intense attention of someone whose life depends on understanding information that can't be learned from books or lectures, only from hard experience in conditions that punish mistakes with death. Your role as teacher has become as important as your function as crew member, because the expansion of Arctic piracy depends on transferring knowledge that took months of dangerous trial and error to acquire. But the most significant change isn't in ice reading or cold weather techniques. It's in the crew's approach to the environment itself. Where the first voyage had been about surviving Arctic conditions long enough to accomplish specific objectives, this second expedition treats the ice and cold as natural allies in a war against conventional limitations. "We're not visiting the ice anymore," Captain Blackheart observes during a morning briefing. The crew gathered around charts that now show their own notations and discoveries rather than simply copying French or Spanish information. "We're living in it, working with it, making it our home territory instead of foreign ground. We're trying to survive." The ship itself reflects this evolution, having been modified based on hard experience with Arctic conditions into something that's no longer quite a conventional vessel. The rigging includes permanent installations for ice removal and cold weather operation. The hull bears reinforcements designed to handle ice contact that would hold an ordinary ship. Most importantly, the interior spaces have been redesigned around the needs of men who must maintain complex survival protocols while remaining ready for combat in extreme conditions. Your personal equipment tells the same story of evolution through necessity. The vest Tom gave you in Port Royal has been replaced by a sophisticated system of layered protection that incorporates lessons learned from French fishermen, Spanish winter sailors, and your own dangerous experiments with what works and what fails in killing cold. Each piece serves multiple purposes, and every element can be adjusted or replaced based on changing conditions without compromising the overall system. But it's the psychological transformation that proves most profound. The constant vigilance and mutual dependence required for Arctic survival has created bonds between crew members that go far beyond ordinary ship's company loyalty. Each man knows exactly what every other man is capable of under pressure, understands precisely how much he can depend on his shipmates when survival is measured in minutes rather than hours. "Different kind of crew," Willem observes, watching the smooth coordination as the men handle sail changes in conditions that would challenge the best warm water sailors. Not just following orders anymore, but thinking together, making decisions together, surviving together in ways that make us stronger than the sum of individual men. This psychological evolution becomes crucial when the crew encounters the most challenging conditions of either Arctic voyage, a storm system that combines extreme cold with hurricane-force winds, creating an ice storm that threatens not just comfort or convenience, but the ship's basic ability to remain afloat and maneuverable. The storm builds with the terrifying speed characteristic of Arctic weather, transforming moderate sailing conditions into a life-threatening emergency within hours. But instead of the desperate scrambling that had marked similar weather during the first voyage, the crew responds with systematic efficiency that demonstrates how thoroughly they've mastered extreme condition operations. Watch rotations shift automatically to emergency schedules without waiting for orders. Hot food and warming stations appear at key positions around the ship before men begin showing signs of dangerous cold exposure. Most importantly, every crew member begins thinking beyond his individual survival toward the collective measures necessary to keep the ship and everyone aboard functioning through conditions that would disable an ordinary crew. Emergency protocols you find yourself explaining to the recruits while helping them adjust their protective gear for maximum effectiveness. Not just about staying warm yourself, but about making sure everyone around you stays functional too. Man next to you gets too cold to think clearly, and his mistakes can kill you both. The storm peaks during the night watch, with winds that drive ice particles like bullets and temperatures that freeze exposed skin within seconds. But the crew's response demonstrates abilities that go far beyond what they'd possessed during the first Arctic voyage. Instead of simply enduring the assault, they actively counter it, using techniques that transform environmental hostility into tactical advantage. Ice accumulation is managed through coordinated removal efforts that prevent dangerous weight buildup while maintaining ship stability. Rigging adjustments accommodate the changing wind patterns without exposing crew members to unnecessary risk. Most impressively, the watch rotation continues smoothly despite conditions that would force most ships to heave to and wait for better weather. "This is what we came north to prove," Captain Blackheart says during a brief break in the storm's fury, his voice carrying satisfaction that goes beyond simple professional pride. That ice pirates can operate when other sailors can't even survive. That we can use the worst conditions as cover for operations that would be impossible in good weather. The proof comes the next morning, when the storm clears to reveal 3 ships trapped in ice formations that had been driven together by the wind, 2 British naval vessels and a Spanish treasure galleon, all immobilized by conditions they hadn't been prepared to handle. Their crews are alive but exhausted, their ships damaged by ice impacts, their combat effectiveness reduced to nearly nothing by the energy they've expended simply staying alive through the storm. "Perfect hunting conditions," Tom observes with professional appreciation, studying the trapped vessels through the ship's spyglass. They can't maneuver, can't coordinate defense, probably can't even get their guns operational in these temperatures. Everything's working in our favor. The attack that follows demonstrates the full evolution of ice piracy from experimental technique to refined art. Instead of direct assault, the crew uses the ice itself as both weapon and camouflage, approaching the trapped ships through frozen formations that provide concealment until the final moment of attack. You find yourself leading one of the boarding parties, a responsibility that would have been unimaginable during your first voyage, but that now feels natural, given your expertise in ice navigation and cold weather combat. The approach requires techniques that combine mountaineering, naval warfare, and Arctic survival into something entirely new, moving across unstable ice formations while carrying weapons and maintaining readiness for close combat. Stay low, watch the ice color, test every step. You instruct your team, drawing on months of hard-won experience with ice travel. Blue-white ice holds your weight. Gray ice might not. Feel for movement before you trust any surface. The British sailors, when you reach them, proved to be professional naval personnel, but completely unprepared for combat in Arctic conditions. Their weapons are affected by the cold, their movements slowed by inadequate protective clothing, their decision-making impaired by the energy they've spent fighting environmental conditions they don't understand. Surrender, and we'll share warming techniques. You offer the British captain a practical negotiation that acknowledges the reality of the situation. Fight, and some of your men die from cold before they die from steel. The British officer, experienced enough to recognize impossible odds when he sees them, chooses practical survival over heroic death. His cooperation provides access not just to the ship's cargo, naval supplies, payroll silver, and charts showing British positions throughout the northern waters, but also to information about other ships that might be caught in similar ice traps. Winter convoy shelter, the British captain explains, pointing to notations on his charts. Regular schedule, predictable routes, crews that think ice makes them safe from pirate attack. You've proven that assumption wrong. The Spanish treasure galleon yields even greater prizes: silver from Mexican mines, gold from Peruvian conquests, and most valuable of all, detailed information about Spanish winter shipping schedules and the locations of protected harbors where treasure ships regularly shelter during the months when normal piracy ceases operations. But the greatest treasure proves to be the demonstration that ice piracy has evolved from desperate expedient to systematic capability. The crew has proven they can operate effectively in conditions that disable conventional naval forces, can use environmental advantages that other sailors regard as purely hostile, and can coordinate complex operations while maintaining the survival protocols necessary for Arctic warfare. New kind of naval warfare, Captain Blackheart observes during the evening celebration. Treasure and captured supplies arranged around the ship's common areas like evidence in a trial where the verdict has already been reached. We're not just pirates anymore, we're specialists in a type of combat that didn't exist before we invented it. The captured British and Spanish officers, once they understand they're not going to be murdered, begin showing professional interest in the techniques that enabled their defeat. Their questions reveal how completely conventional naval thinking has been challenged by the crew's innovations. How do you maintain weapons functionality in these temperatures? The British captain asks, examining the modifications that keep muskets and pistols operational despite conditions that would disable ordinary military equipment. How do you coordinate movement across unstable ice? The Spanish captain inquires, studying the ropes and ice axes that enabled the boarding parties to approach across terrain that should have been impassable. Most tellingly, how do you keep crews functional for extended operations in conditions that exhaust ordinary sailors within hours? The answers reveal the depth of innovation that separates ice piracy from conventional maritime warfare. Every piece of equipment has been modified through trial and error. Every technique has been refined through dangerous experimentation. Most importantly, every crew member has been trained to think beyond individual survival toward collective capability in conditions that test the absolute limits of human endurance. As the Serpent's Tooth continues north with captured ships in tow, using the ice roads that connect frozen waterways like highways known only to Arctic specialists, you realize that you've participated in something larger than successful piracy. The crew has created a new form of maritime warfare that could revolutionize naval operations in northern waters. The implications extend beyond simple military advantage. The techniques developed for ice piracy could transform Arctic exploration, northern commerce, even the basic human relationship with environments previously considered too hostile for sustained operations. The knowledge gained through the necessity of survival in extreme conditions has applications that go far beyond robbery and violence. Teaching expedition, Willem suggests during a planning session for future operations, studying charts that show potential routes through ice fields that could connect previously isolated northern settlements. Take what we've learned about ice navigation and cold weather survival, offer it to merchants, explorers, anyone who needs to operate in waters that defeat ordinary sailors. The concept represents another evolution in the crew's understanding of their capabilities. Instead of simply using Arctic expertise for piracy, they could become the specialists that enable other forms of northern activity, guides for legitimate commerce, instructors for naval expeditions, consultants for colonial development in regions where environmental challenges have previously prevented sustained operations. But the immediate priority remains the establishment of ice piracy as a systematic discipline rather than experimental technique. The success of the second Arctic voyage has proven that cold weather raiding can be repeated and refined, but scaling up requires infrastructure, training facilities, and most importantly, a steady supply of men willing to undergo the physical and psychological transformation necessary for Arctic operations. Permanent base, Captain Blackheart decides, studying charts that show potential locations for year-round Arctic operations. Sheltered harbor, access to ice routes, defendable position, facilities for training new crews, and maintaining specialized equipment. The location he identifies combines natural protection with strategic position. A deep fjord that remains ice-free even in winter, surrounded by mountains that provide wind protection, accessible to ice routes that could support raiding operations throughout the northern waters. Most importantly, it's remote enough to avoid interference from naval patrols while remaining accessible to the shipping routes that provide both targets and supplies. As winter deepens and the ice roads solidify into highways that will support major operations, you find yourself helping to plan the establishment of what could become the first permanent Arctic pirate base, a facility designed from the ground up to support cold weather maritime warfare, staffed by men who've mastered environmental conditions that defeat ordinary sailors. The work involves more than simple construction and supply. Creating a sustainable Arctic community requires understanding of food preservation, fuel management, medical treatment for cold injuries, psychological support for men living in extreme isolation, and most importantly, the maintenance of specialized equipment and knowledge that makes survival possible in conditions where mistakes mean death within minutes. Your role in this planning reflects how completely you've evolved from desperate merchant sailor to Arctic specialist whose knowledge could make the difference between successful operations and catastrophic failure. The techniques you've learned and the experience you've gained represent irreplaceable resources for anyone attempting to establish sustained operations in waters where environmental mastery is more important than traditional military skill. As the Serpent's Tooth approaches the site chosen for the permanent base, loaded with captured treasure and accompanied by recruited specialists whose expertise will be essential for Arctic operations, you think about the transformation that brought you from Port Royal's alleys to the edge of the known world, from individual desperation to collective mastery of impossible conditions. The cold that had seemed like an enemy during those first terrifying days has become the foundation of a new way of life, a set of skills and knowledge and relationships that could change not just your own future, but the entire human relationship with environments previously considered too hostile for sustained activity. Tomorrow, you'll begin the work of building something that has never existed before, a community designed around the mastery of extreme conditions, populated by men who've learned to turn environmental hostility into tactical advantage. The construction of Haven, as the crew names the permanent base, becomes a masterpiece of Arctic engineering that incorporates everything learned through months of dangerous experimentation with cold weather survival. The natural harbor provides protection from the worst storms, but it's the human modifications that transform the site from temporary shelter into sustainable community capable of supporting year-round operations in conditions that would kill ordinary settlements within weeks. The first structures follow principles learned from Inuit techniques acquired during northern raids, but adapted for the specific needs of men whose survival depends on maintaining combat readiness rather than simple subsistence. Instead of traditional igloos, the crew builds stone and timber structures with multiple heating systems, insulated storage areas for weapons and equipment, and most importantly, communal spaces designed around the social cooperation that makes Arctic survival possible. Heat-sharing architecture, you explain to new arrivals, demonstrating how the building design channels warmth from central fires through stone passages that distribute heat evenly while preventing dangerous accumulation of smoke or fuel consumption that could exhaust limited resources. Every structure designed so that individual warming efforts benefit the whole community. Your role in the base's construction reflects the expertise gained through hard experience with what works and what fails in extreme conditions. The knowledge that seemed purely personal during those first desperate months of learning cold weather survival has become essential information for anyone attempting to establish permanent operations in Arctic waters. The workshops that emerge from the base construction represent another innovation. Facilities specifically designed for modifying equipment and clothing to function reliably in conditions that defeat ordinary materials and construction. Here, captured weapons are adapted for cold weather use, standard sailing gear is reinforced and waterproofed for ice operations, and most importantly, new crew members learn to modify their personal equipment based on trial and error experience that could otherwise take years to acquire. Everything gets customized, Willem explains to a group of recruits, demonstrating the complex process of adapting a standard cutlass for use with thick gloves while maintaining balance and effectiveness. Take something made for warm weather fighting and you modify it until it works better in cold conditions than it ever worked in warm ones. But the most important construction proves to be social rather than physical. The development of systems that maintain crew morale and cooperation during the long Arctic winter, when isolation and darkness test psychological endurance as severely as physical conditions test bodily survival. The base incorporates facilities for entertainment, education, and shared activities that prevent the kind of deterioration that destroys other attempts at sustained Arctic operations. Mental warmth, Iron Mac calls it, organizing evening gatherings where crew members share stories, teach specialized skills, and maintain the social bonds that make collective survival possible. Bodies can handle cold if minds stay strong. Mind stays strong when men remember they're not fighting the ice alone. The first winter at Haven proves the concept beyond any doubt. Instead of merely surviving until spring, the base crew conducts active operations throughout the coldest months, taking advantage of ice conditions that immobilize conventional shipping while providing highways for raiders who understand Arctic travel. The permanent facility enables sustained campaigns that would be impossible for crews operating from temporary shelters. But it's the arrival of new recruits that demonstrates the true significance of what you participated in creating. Men arrive from throughout the pirate community, drawn by stories of Arctic success and the possibility of learning techniques that could transform their own capabilities. Some are experienced pirates seeking new methods. Others are sailors fleeing naval pursuit or merchant service conditions, all united by the desire to master skills that represent genuine innovation in maritime warfare. School for Impossible Conditions, Captain Blackheart announces during the midwinter gathering. The entire base community assembled in the main hall around fires that provide both warmth and light for the formal recognition of the base's first graduation class. Men who came here as ordinary sailors, leaving as specialists in warfare that didn't exist before we invented it. Your own recognition during this ceremony reflects how completely you've been transformed from merchant sailor refugee into Arctic warfare instructor, whose knowledge enables other men's survival and success. The techniques you teach have been proven through combat and refined through constant use, representing genuine expertise rather than theoretical knowledge. But the ceremony also reveals the broader implications of Arctic mastery beyond simple piracy. The skills developed for cold weather raiding have applications that extend far beyond robbery and violence, creating possibilities for Arctic exploration, northern commerce, and permanent settlement in regions previously considered uninhabitable. Delegation from the Hudson's Bay Company, Captain Blackheart announces, introducing men whose presence at a pirate base would have been unimaginable before the development of Arctic expertise. They want to hire us to establish trading posts in regions where their own men can't survive, to guide expeditions into territories where environmental knowledge matters more than commercial experience. The proposition represents another evolution in the crew's understanding of their capabilities. Instead of simple piracy, they could become the specialists that enable legitimate Arctic development, guides for trading expeditions, instructors for colonial settlements, consultants for any operation that requires sustained activity in extreme conditions. Different kind of prosperity, Willem observes during the discussions that follow. Studying maps, that show potential trading routes through ice fields that could connect European markets with Arctic resources that have never been exploited because the environmental challenges seemed insurmountable. Instead of stealing wealth, we could be creating it, opening up possibilities that didn't exist before we learned to work with conditions that defeat other men. But the most significant opportunity comes from an unexpected source, a representative of the British Admiralty who arrives under flag of truce with a proposition that acknowledges the strategic value of Arctic warfare capabilities. Her Majesty's Navy wishes to discuss terms, the naval officer announces, his presence at a pirate base representing dramatic changes in official thinking about Arctic operations. The French are developing their own cold-weather naval capabilities. Spanish treasure fleets are requesting naval escort through northern waters. We need advisors who understand ice warfare better than our own officers do. The negotiation that follows demonstrates how completely the crew has transformed from outlaws fleeing conventional authority into specialists whose expertise is valuable enough to override traditional legal concerns. Instead of capture and hanging, they're offered commissions, pardons, and most importantly, official support for Arctic operations that could give British forces decisive advantages in northern waters. Privateer commissions, Captain Blackheart explains during the crew discussions that determine whether to accept official status or maintain independence. Legal protection for operations against French and Spanish shipping, naval support for bases and equipment, formal recognition that what we've developed has strategic value beyond simple piracy. The debate reveals divisions within the crew between men who prefer the freedom of outlaw status and others who recognize the advantages of official backing for operations that require substantial infrastructure and support. But underlying both positions is recognition that Arctic expertise has created possibilities that transcend traditional categories of legal and illegal maritime activity. Your own position in these discussions reflects the unique perspective of someone who's experienced the complete transformation from desperate fugitive to essential specialist. The skills you've gained and the knowledge you possess represent capabilities that could serve various masters: pirate crews seeking new methods, trading companies requiring Arctic guidance, naval forces developing cold weather tactics, or independent operations that push the boundaries of human activity in extreme environments. Question isn't who we serve, you observe during one particularly heated discussion, but how we use what we've learned to advance human capability in conditions that have always defeated previous attempts. We've proven that Arctic mastery is possible. Now we decide what to do with that proof. The decision ultimately reached represents a compromise that acknowledges both the value of independence and the advantages of official support. Instead of accepting formal naval commissions, the crew negotiates agreements that provide legal protection and logistical support for Arctic operations while maintaining operational independence and the right to develop their expertise according to their own judgment rather than bureaucratic requirements. Consulting arrangement, Captain Blackheart announces after weeks of negotiation. We provide training, guidance, and specialized services for officially sponsored Arctic operations. In return, we receive protection, supplies, and formal recognition that our methods represent legitimate advances in maritime capability, rather than simple criminal activity. The arrangement transforms Haven from pirate hideout into something unprecedented, a training facility for Arctic warfare that serves multiple clients while maintaining independence necessary for continued innovation. The base becomes a destination for anyone requiring expertise in extreme condition operations, from naval officers learning ice tactics to merchant captains planning northern trading routes. But the most significant transformation proves to be personal rather than institutional. Your role evolves from crew member to senior instructor, whose expertise enables other men's success in conditions that would otherwise defeat them. The knowledge gained through desperate necessity has become professional capability that commands respect and compensation rather than simple survival. Master of Arctic Operations reads the formal certification provided by the naval arrangement, recognizing expertise that has been proven through combat and refined through constant application. The title represents acknowledgement that you've achieved genuine mastery of skills that few humans have ever possessed. As spring approaches and ice conditions begin changing from highways to obstacles, the base prepares for another operational season with capabilities that far exceed anything possible during your first tentative ventures into cold waters. New crews arrive for training, experienced raiders plan campaigns that will use Arctic techniques in temperate waters, and most importantly, the knowledge base continues expanding through systematic experimentation rather than desperate improvisation. Second generation of ice pirates, Willem observes, watching new recruits practice techniques that took the original crew months of dangerous trial to develop. Men who learn in safety what we learned through near-death experience, who start with proven methods instead of having to invent everything from necessity. The observation reflects the broader significance of what you've participated in creating. The transformation from individual survival to collective expertise, from desperate improvisation to systematic technique, from criminal activity to recognized professional capability, represents something much larger than successful piracy. You've helped create new forms of human relationship with environments previously considered too hostile for sustained activity. The techniques developed for Arctic survival have applications that extend far beyond maritime warfare, creating possibilities for exploration, commerce, and settlement in regions that have never supported human communities, because the environmental challenges seemed insurmountable. As the base settles into the rhythms of permanent operations, with training programs for new specialists, consulting arrangements with various clients, and ongoing development of techniques that push the boundaries of what's possible in extreme conditions, you realize that the merchant sailor who fled Port Royal years ago has become something that didn't exist before he helped create it. The transformation isn't just personal. It represents a new category of human capability, a demonstration that environmental conditions previously considered purely hostile can be mastered and turned into advantages for those willing to undergo the physical and psychological changes necessary for such mastery. Tonight, you'll sleep in a heated room designed according to principles learned through hard experience, surrounded by men whose survival skills could enable human activity in regions where it was never before possible, in a community that represents genuine innovation in the human relationship with extreme environments. Tomorrow, you'll continue the work of refining and teaching techniques that could change not just maritime warfare, but the basic human capacity to live and work in conditions that have always defeated previous attempts. The cold that once threatened to kill you has become the foundation of capabilities that could transform human activity in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. The knowledge gained through desperate necessity has become professional expertise that commands respect, compensation, and recognition that extends far beyond the pirate community where it originated. The legacy of Haven extends far beyond what any of you imagined during those first desperate experiments with Arctic survival, spreading through maritime communities like knowledge of a new sea route or revolutionary navigation technique. Within 2 years, reports arrived from across the northern Atlantic of crews using modified versions of your techniques, of ships surviving conditions that would have destroyed them before, of trading expeditions reaching markets that had been inaccessible because the environmental challenges seemed insurmountable. Ripple effects, Captain Blackheart observes during one of the evening briefings, studying correspondence from former crew members who've carried Arctic techniques to other ships and other waters. Every man we've trained becomes a teacher himself. Every technique we've developed gets adapted for new conditions, new purposes. The letters reveal transformations that mirror your own journey from desperate adaptation to systematic mastery. A former gunner named McPherson writes from a British naval expedition to chart northern passages, describing how heat-sharing protocols developed for pirate raids have been adapted for scientific exploration in waters where previous mapping attempts failed due to crew casualties from cold exposure. Another correspondent, a cook called Fat Billy, who learned food preparation techniques during his winter at Haven, reports from a trading post on the Labrador coast where modified versions of Iron Mac's warming cuisine have enabled the first successful year-round European settlement in a region where previous attempts ended in starvation or evacuation before spring. But the most significant reports come from places you've never been, describing applications of Arctic techniques in environments that weren't part of your original experience. A letter from the Baltic describes Swedish naval operations using ice-reading techniques to gain tactical advantages over Russian fleets. Another from Scotland details fishing communities using modified cold-weather gear to work waters that had previously been accessible only during the briefest summer seasons. Knowledge spreading faster than we can track it, Willem notes, with mixture of pride and concern, examining charts that show the geographical distribution of techniques that originated at Haven. Question is whether the men using our methods understand them well enough to avoid the mistakes that could get them killed. The concern proves well-founded when reports begin arriving of failures and disasters, expeditions that attempted Arctic operations without adequate preparation, crews that applied individual techniques without understanding the integrated systems that make cold weather survival possible, traders who died attempting to use ice routes without mastering the navigation skills necessary for safe passage. Learning the techniques isn't enough. You realize during a discussion about training standardization, men need to understand the philosophy behind the methods, the integrated thinking that makes survival possible when individual techniques aren't sufficient. This understanding leads to the development of formal curriculum for Arctic operations training, systematic instruction that covers not just specific skills, but the mental approaches necessary for sustained success in extreme conditions. Your role in creating this curriculum reflects how completely your expertise has evolved from desperate improvisation to teachable discipline. The training programs that emerge from these efforts become models for instruction in other specialized maritime fields. Instead of simple apprenticeship where techniques are learned through trial and error, Haven develops comprehensive education that includes theoretical understanding, practical application, psychological preparation, and most importantly, integration of individual skills into collective capabilities. Revolutionary approach to seamanship education observes a visiting naval instructor studying methods that produce competent Arctic operators in months rather than years. You've demonstrated that complex environmental skills can be taught systematically instead of leaving men to learn through dangerous experience. But the most profound impact proves to be cultural rather than technical. The success of Arctic piracy has challenged fundamental assumptions about human limitations in extreme environments, creating new possibilities for activities that were previously considered impossible due to environmental constraints. Trading companies begin planning year-round operations in northern waters, using modified vessels and trained crews to maintain commerce during seasons when shipping had traditionally ceased. Naval forces develop cold weather tactics that provide strategic advantages in conflicts that extend into regions where environmental mastery becomes more important than conventional military strength. Most significantly, settlement patterns begin changing as communities discover that proper techniques enable permanent habitation in regions that had been considered too hostile for sustained human presence. The knowledge that seemed purely piratical has become foundation for expanding human activity into environments that had always defeated previous attempts. We've changed what humans think is possible. You realized during a conversation with a delegation from the Royal Society, scientists who want to study the physiological and psychological adaptations that enable Arctic mastery, not just in piracy or even maritime activity, but in the basic human relationship with extreme environments. The scientific interest reflects broader recognition that your transformation represents more than acquisition of useful skills. The adaptations necessary for Arctic survival have created new categories of human capability, demonstrating that environmental conditions previously considered purely hostile can be mastered through systematic development of appropriate physical and mental responses. Evolutionary adaptation, one of the natural philosophers explains, studying measurements that document the physical changes wrought by years of cold weather operations. Your lung capacity, muscle development, circulation patterns, even brain function. Everything has adapted for optimal performance in conditions that would disable ordinary humans. But the adaptation extends beyond individual physiology to collective behavior patterns that enable group survival in conditions where individual effort fails. The cooperation techniques developed for pirate crews have applications for any community attempting to survive in environments where mutual dependence becomes essential for everyone's survival. As your reputation as Arctic specialist spreads beyond maritime circles, invitations arrive from unexpected sources. Colonial administrators want consultation on northern settlement projects. military planners seek advice on cold weather campaigns. Even theologians express interest in what they consider demonstration of human capacity to thrive in environments that seem designed to humble human pride. Philosophical implications. One visiting scholar explains during a lengthy discussion about the broader meaning of environmental mastery. If humans can learn to thrive in conditions that appear fundamentally hostile, what does that suggest about human nature itself? About our relationship with the natural world? About the possibilities for human development? The questions go far beyond practical applications of survival techniques to fundamental issues about human potential and limitation. Your journey from desperate merchant sailor to Arctic master has become evidence in debates about whether human beings are fundamentally constrained by environmental conditions or capable of transcending apparent limitations through appropriate adaptation. But the most meaningful recognition comes from sources closer to your origins. A letter arrives from Port Royal, written by Tom Cutlass, now operating his own tavern and serving as unofficial recruiting agent for Arctic operations. His words carry the perspective of someone who recognized potential during your most desperate moment. Knew you had it in you, he writes, the hunger that drives men beyond what they thought possible. But what you've built goes beyond individual success. You've proven that desperation can become mastery, that environmental enemies can become allies, that men willing to change everything about themselves can change everything about what's possible. The letter accompanies a small package containing the original vest he gave you during that first night in his tavern, now modified with techniques you've developed but still recognizable as the foundation of your Arctic gear. The symbolism is clear. The tools that enabled your initial survival have evolved into the foundation of capabilities that extend far beyond personal adaptation. As autumn approaches and Haven prepares for another operational season, the base has become something none of you anticipated during its construction. Instead of simple pirate hideout, it's evolved into a center for advancing human capability in extreme environments, a place where techniques developed through criminal necessity have become foundation for legitimate expansion of human activity into regions that had always defeated previous attempts. Your own role has evolved correspondingly, from crew member learning survival techniques to director of programs that push the boundaries of human environmental adaptation. The knowledge gained through desperate necessity has become professional expertise that commands international recognition and enables others to achieve what had previously been considered impossible. Next expedition, Captain Blackheart announces during the season planning meeting, pushes further north than anyone's gone before. Not for treasure this time, but for knowledge. To map ice routes that could support permanent Arctic commerce, to establish supply stations for expeditions that go beyond the edge of known waters. The proposal represents another evolution in your understanding of Arctic capabilities. Instead of using environmental mastery purely for predatory purposes, the crew will apply their expertise to expansion of human geographical knowledge and activity, becoming explorers whose survival skills enable them to operate in regions where previous expeditions failed due to environmental challenges. Exploration rather than exploitation, Willem observes, studying charts that show the northern limits of human geographical knowledge. using what we've learned about survival to advance human understanding of regions that have always been too dangerous to study properly. The distinction reflects broader changes in how you understand the value and application of Arctic expertise. The techniques developed for piracy have proven applicable to any sustained human activity in extreme conditions, creating possibilities for scientific exploration, commercial development, and permanent settlement that extend far beyond maritime warfare. As preparations begin for expeditions that will test Arctic techniques at their absolute limits, you realize that your transformation from desperate fugitive to environmental specialist represents something larger than individual success. The knowledge gained through necessity has become foundation for advancing human capability in conditions that had always been considered insurmountable barriers to sustained activity. Tonight, you'll sleep in a heated room whose design incorporates innovations that enable permanent human habitation in one of the most challenging environments on Earth, surrounded by men whose expertise could support human communities in regions where such communities were never before possible, in a facility that represents genuine advancement in human environmental capability. Tomorrow, you'll continue work on techniques that could enable human exploration of regions beyond the current edge of geographical knowledge, using skills developed through criminal necessity to advance legitimate understanding of environments that have always defeated previous attempts at systematic study. The merchant sailor who fled Port Royal seeking only survival has become an innovator whose expertise enables others to achieve what was previously impossible, whose adaptation to extreme conditions has created new categories of human environmental capability, whose knowledge represents genuine contribution to expanding the range of conditions under which human communities can thrive. The cold that once threatened your life has become the foundation of capabilities that could support human activity in some of the most challenging environments on Earth, demonstrating that apparent limitations can be transcended through appropriate adaptation, that environmental hostility can be transformed into tactical advantage, and that desperate necessity can become the foundation of unprecedented achievement. The final expedition launches on a morning when the aurora borealis dances across the pre-dawn sky like nature's blessing on an endeavor that pushes beyond the edge of human geographical knowledge into waters where no ship has ever returned to tell of what lies beyond the ice. This voyage represents not piracy or even exploration in the conventional sense, but pure testing of human capability against the most extreme conditions the planet can offer. Validation that the techniques developed through desperate necessity can enable sustained activity in environments that have always defeated previous attempts. Edge of the world, Captain Blackheart says simply, as the Serpent's Tooth, now heavily modified for operations in conditions that would destroy ordinary vessels, cuts through ice-choked waters toward coordinates that exist only as theoretical calculations on charts that end in blank spaces marked Unknown Arctic. The crew that accompanies this ultimate voyage represents the culmination of years of selection and training, men whose Arctic expertise has been proven through survival in conditions that killed others, whose cooperation has been tested through emergencies that would destroy ordinary teams. Your role as expedition leader reflects how completely you've evolved from desperate fugitive to master of capabilities that enable human activity where it was never before possible. The techniques you've learned and refined through hard experience, the knowledge you've gained through systematic observation of what works and what fails in extreme conditions, and most importantly, the understanding you've developed of how human beings can adapt to environmental challenges that initially seem insurmountable. All of these come together in an expedition that tests the absolute limits of what humans can achieve in the most hostile environment on Earth. Further north than Frobisher, Willem observes, studying charts that show the known limits of previous exploration attempts. Further than Hudson, further than any European has gone and lived to map. We're sailing into country that exists only in Inuit legends and sailors' nightmares. The waters you enter become progressively more challenging, testing every survival technique and cooperative method developed during years of Arctic operations. Ice formations grow larger and more complex, requiring navigation skills that combine seamanship with mountaineering, as the crew guides the ship through channels that close and open with tidal movements, powerful enough to crush vessels that can't read the patterns correctly. Ice architecture. You find yourself explaining to crew members who haven't experienced formations this massive and complex, pointing to pressure ridges that tower 50 feet above the waterline and extend unknown depths below. Like sailing through a city built of frozen water where every street can become a dead end and every building can collapse without warning. But it's the cold itself that provides the ultimate test of everything you've learned about human adaptation to extreme conditions. Temperatures drop to levels where exposed skin freezes within seconds, where metal becomes brittle enough to shatter, where ordinary survival techniques prove inadequate, and only the most sophisticated methods enable sustained activity. Beyond survival, Iron Mac observes during a meal preparation that requires techniques developed specifically for conditions where ordinary cooking becomes impossible. This isn't about staying alive anymore. It's about staying functional, staying alert, staying capable of making decisions when the environment's trying to shut down every system in your body. The food he prepares incorporates everything learned about nutrition for extreme cold survival. Concentrated fats that burn slowly in the body, proteins that maintain muscle function despite caloric demands that exceed normal intake, vitamins that prevent the deficiency diseases that have destroyed other Arctic expeditions. But more than nutrition, the meal represents community, the shared warmth and cooperation that enables human groups to thrive in conditions that would kill individuals. The psychological challenges prove as demanding as the physical ones, testing the mental adaptations that enable clear thinking and sound judgment when environmental stress reaches levels that impair cognitive function in ordinary humans. The techniques developed for maintaining crew effectiveness during prolonged Arctic operations become essential for expedition success as the cold and isolation push every man toward the edge of psychological endurance. Mental heat management. You explained during one of the evening discussions that help maintain morale and mental clarity despite conditions that challenge the crew's understanding of what humans can endure. Keep minds warm the same way we keep bodies warm. Shared effort, mutual support, constant attention to signs that someone's getting cold in ways that affect judgment. The expedition reveals phenomena that no European has previously observed. ice formations and weather patterns that suggest the Arctic Ocean contains geographical features that could revolutionize understanding of northern geography. Leads in the ice reveal currents that might connect Atlantic and Pacific waters through polar routes. Ice formations show patterns that suggest land masses or oceanic features that don't appear on any existing charts. New World, Captain Blackheart says during one of the navigation discussions, studying observations that challenge existing assumptions about Arctic geography. Not just new territory, but new understanding of how the northern waters connect to everything else. What we're learning here could change the way ships navigate between Europe and Asia. But the most significant discoveries prove to be about human capability rather than geographical features. Each day of operations in conditions that exceed anything previously survived by European expeditions demonstrates that proper preparation and cooperative techniques enable sustained human activity in environments that had always been considered absolutely hostile to human presence. Proof of concept, Willem observes, after a particularly challenging day of navigation through ice fields that would have stopped any conventionally equipped expedition. We're not just surviving conditions that kill other men. We're working effectively, making progress, accomplishing objectives in an environment that's supposed to be impossible for human operations. The validation extends beyond simple survival to complex task performance under extreme stress. Navigation calculations that require precise mental work despite physical discomfort that affects concentration. Equipment maintenance that demands manual dexterity despite temperatures that numb fingers within minutes. Most importantly, group decision-making that requires clear communication and sound judgment when environmental stress pushes every individual toward isolation and self-protection. Human cooperation under impossible conditions, you realize during a moment of reflection while standing watch in temperatures that would have killed the merchant sailor you once were. We've learned how to maintain the social bonds that make survival possible, even when every individual instinct says to worry only about personal survival. The expedition's climax comes when you reach waters so far north that compass readings become unreliable, and navigation must depend on astronomical observation and ice reading skills that have been developed through years of dangerous experience. Here, in conditions that represent the absolute limit of what human beings can endure, the crew accomplishes mapping and observation work that advances geographical knowledge while demonstrating human capability that exceeds anything previously achieved in extreme environments. Furthest north ever recorded, Captain Blackheart announces during the ceremony that marks the expedition's maximum penetration into unexplored Arctic waters. But more than distance, proof that humans can operate effectively in conditions that were considered absolutely limiting to human activity. The return journey becomes a masterpiece of Arctic navigation and survival technique, demonstrating how thoroughly the crew has mastered environmental conditions that challenge every aspect of human capability. Ice reading, weather prediction, route finding, equipment maintenance, psychological support. Every technique developed through years of Arctic operations proves essential for bringing the expedition safely back to waters where other humans can verify and confirm the achievements. Knowledge that changes everything, Willem observes during one of the final planning sessions before returning to Haven. Not just about geography, but about human potential. about what becomes possible when people learn to work with conditions instead of fighting them. The reception that greets the expedition's return reflects the broader significance of what has been accomplished. Representatives from governments, trading companies, scientific societies, and military organizations gather at Haven to hear reports that could revolutionize understanding of both Arctic geography and human environmental capability. Unprecedented achievement, declares the representative from the Royal Society, studying charts and observations that document human activity in regions where it was never before considered possible. You've demonstrated that proper preparation and technique enable sustained human operations in the most extreme conditions on Earth. But the most meaningful recognition comes from the crew members themselves, men who understand precisely what has been accomplished because they participated in achieving it. The shared experience of pushing human capability to its absolute limits has created bonds that go beyond ordinary friendship or professional association to something that approaches brotherhood, forged through transcendence of limitations that had always seemed absolute. We've proven something important, you tell the assembled crew during the final expedition briefing, looking at faces that show the marks of extreme conditions, but also the satisfaction of unprecedented achievement. That environmental barriers that seem insurmountable can be overcome through proper adaptation, that human limitations can be transcended through appropriate technique and cooperation. As Haven settles into the routines of preparing for the next phase of Arctic operations, now proven capable of supporting human activity at the very edge of what the planet makes possible, you think about the transformation that brought you from Port Royal's desperate alleys to leadership of expeditions that advance human understanding of environmental possibility. The merchant sailor who fled Captain Morrison's ship seeking only survival has become an innovator whose techniques enable human achievement in conditions that were previously considered absolutely limiting. The knowledge gained through desperate necessity has become foundation for advancing human capability in environments that had always defeated previous attempts at sustained activity. The cold that once threatened to kill you has become the medium through which you've helped demonstrate that human beings can adapt to and ultimately master environmental conditions that seem designed to prevent human presence. The techniques developed for survival have become foundation for exploration, commerce, and scientific investigation in regions where such activities were never before possible. Tonight, you'll sleep in facilities designed according to principles learned through hard experience with the most challenging conditions on Earth, surrounded by men whose expertise enables human activity where it was never before possible, in a community that represents genuine advancement in human environmental capability. Tomorrow, you'll begin planning expeditions that will use the techniques proven during this ultimate voyage to advance human knowledge and activity in regions that remain unexplored because the environmental challenges have always seemed insurmountable. The cold that once seemed like an enemy has become the foundation of capabilities that could support human exploration and development in some of the most challenging environments the planet offers. The desperate necessity that drove you from merchant service to pirate survival has become the foundation of expertise that advances human understanding of environmental possibility, proving that apparent limitations can be transcended through appropriate adaptation, that hostile conditions can be transformed into tactical advantages, and that individual transformation can enable collective advancement into realms that were never before accessible to human achievement. In the end, the story that began with a merchant sailor stealing a moldy biscuit has become proof that human beings can learn to thrive in conditions that initially seemed designed to destroy them, that cooperation can enable survival where individual effort fails, and that knowledge gained through necessity can become foundation for achievements that expand the very definition of what humans can accomplish when they refuse to accept environmental limitations as absolute barriers to human potential.